The void of the Krellian sector was not truly black. It was a tapestry of bruised purples and deep indigo, painted by the diffuse gas of the Veil Nebula that stretched across 3 star systems. In the center of this celestial quiet, the human hospital ship Aegis of Mercy drifted like a polished pearl. It was a vessel of peace, painted in stark, blinding white that stood out against the darkness of deep space. On its flanks, the universal symbol of medical neutrality, a sapphire circle bisected by a golden laurel, glowed with its own internal light. The ship was massive, a floating city designed to mend broken bodies and house the displaced. It carried no heavy cannons, no torpedo bays, and its shields were calibrated only to deflect micrometeoroids and solar radiation. Around it, 4 drone escorts hovered in formation. These small, angular machines bore the dual insignias of the Terran Federation and the Imperial Ascendancy, a mechanical testament to the fragile truce that had held the galaxy together for 5 tenuous years. Captain Halloway stood on the bridge of the Aegis, watching the telemetry readouts. The silence of the demilitarized zone was unnerving. He checked the time. It was 1400 hours, ship time. The shift change was underway. Lieutenant Sarah Mills looked up from her console, her brow furrowed. "Captain, the drones are breaking formation." Halloway frowned. "That is not scheduled. Hail them." "They are not responding," Mills said, her voice rising in pitch. "They are accelerating. They are withdrawing to the sector perimeter." A cold knot of dread tightened in Halloway's stomach. The drones were the only guarantee of safety in this lawless corridor. Without them, the Aegis was a sitting duck. "Get me the Imperial traffic control," Halloway ordered. "And sound the warning klaxon never finished its first cycle." Space tore open. It was not a hyperspace window, but the shimmering heat-haze distortion of high-grade cloaking fields collapsing. 6 heavy frigates materialized less than 5,000 kilometers off the port bow. They were sleek, predatory shapes, dark as obsidian, with no transponder codes broadcasting their identity. "Shields up!" Halloway roared. It was too late. The first salvo was a blinding barrage of ion-charged plasma that hammered the Aegis with the force of a collapsing star. The white hull buckled. The bridge shook violently, throwing the crew from their stations. On the lower decks, the horror was absolute. In the pediatric recovery ward, the lights flickered and died, replaced by the screaming red of emergency strobes. Dr. Elias Ward was changing a bandage on a young boy's arm when the world tilted sideways. The gravity generators failed. Elias grabbed the boy, shoving him under a reinforced triage table just as the bulkhead wall disintegrated. The sound was deafening, the groan of twisting metal and the hiss of atmosphere venting. Then came the silence. The vacuum was a hungry beast. It sucked the air out of the room in a single violent breath. Elias anchored himself to a support strut, his arm locked around the child's waist. He watched, helpless and screaming without sound, as beds, medical scanners, and data pads were pulled into the cold void. A drawing the boy had made earlier, a crude crayon sketch of a sun smiling over a green field, fluttered past Elias's face and vanished into the nebula. Outside, the Aegis of Mercy broke apart. The structural spine snapped. The gleaming white hull was scorched black and torn open, spilling its contents into the indifferent dark. The attacking ships did not stop. They circled the wreckage, firing precision lasers into the debris fields, ensuring that nothing larger than a life pod survived. It was a slaughter. It was efficient, brutal, and devoid of hesitation. 10 minutes later, the obsidian ships re-engaged their cloaks and vanished, leaving only a graveyard of frozen metal and silence drifting in the purple mist of the Veil Nebula. The Imperial Palace on Prime was a structure built to intimidate. It was a spire of crystalline glass and durasteel that pierced the clouds, overlooking a city of billions. In the upper reaches of the spire, where the air was thin and scented with jasmine and ozone, Princess Lyra sat before a wall-sized holographic display. She was a creature of striking, ethereal beauty, typical of the high caste ascendancy bloodline. Her skin was a pale, opalescent violet that seemed to shimmer with an inner light, and her hair fell in cascades of silver down her back. But it was her eyes that held the room's attention. Large, luminescent, and gold, currently narrowed in intense scrutiny. The news feed played on a loop. The headline screamed across the bottom of the visual field in jagged imperial script. They destroyed a human hospital ship. Now alien princess demands justice from the Empire. The audio was a cacophony of pundits and political analysts. This was a provocation by human separatists. One commentator insisted, his voice shrill. They sacrificed their own to garner sympathy and break the truce. Nonsense, another countered. The debris field suggests heavy weapon impacts. Only a military-grade force could achieve that level of destruction in under 12 minutes. Lyra waved a hand, and the volume muted. She did not need their opinions. She needed the data. She rewound the footage of the initial report. The timestamp showed the escort drones departing exactly 3 minutes before the first energy spike was detected. 3 minutes. That was not a sensor glitch or a cowardly retreat. That was a command. She leaned forward, her golden eyes reflecting the tragic, grainy images of the floating wreckage. "Computer," Lyra said, her voice cool and melodic. "Isolate the trajectory of the first volley." "Working." The room's AI responded. "Trajectory suggests point-blank range. The firing pattern is consistent with Imperial heavy frigates, Class 4. Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with climate control. Class 4 frigates were not available on the black market. They were the backbone of her uncle's fleet. The official report claimed human terrorists had smuggled explosives on board, but the debris was scattered outward, implying external impact, not internal detonation. The inconsistencies were not just cracks in the story, they were chasms. The door to her chambers chimed. She called out, standing up and smoothing the silk of her ceremonial robes. A royal guard stepped in, bowing low. "Your Highness, the High Council is in session. Grand Admiral Sarax has requested your presence." "Requested," Lyra repeated dryly, "or demanded." The guard did not answer, which was an answer in itself. Lyra took a breath, centering herself. Her skin pulsed faintly, a soft lavender glow betraying her anxiety. But she willed it to fade. She walked past the guard, her head held high. If they wanted the Princess of the Ascendancy, she would give them a show. But she would not give them her silence. The council chamber was a cavernous circular room dominated by a floating obsidian table. The lighting was dim, designed to make the councilors look imposing. Grand Admiral Sarax sat at the head of the table, his uniform adorned with enough medals to anchor a small ship. He was a large man, his skin a darker shade of violet than Lyra's, and his face was a mask of disciplined aggression. Beside him sat the Minister of Intelligence and the High Treasurer. They stopped talking as Lyra entered. "Niece," Sarax said, his voice a deep rumble. "We are glad you could join us. The situation is volatile." Lyra took her seat, folding her hands on the table. Volatile is a mild word for the murder of 3,000 civilians. "Uncle." Sarax's eyes tightened. "Casualties of war. Lyra, a war the humans are desperate to restart. Is that the narrative we are choosing?" Lyra asked, her tone sharp. That humans blew up their own children to annoy us? It is not a narrative, the Minister of Intelligence snapped. It is the truth. We have intelligence that a radical human faction, the Terra First Vanguard, planted antimatter charges in the ship's reactor core. They wanted a martyr. Antimatter charges explode from the inside out, Lyra countered, reciting the physics she had studied at the academy. The telemetry shows the hull buckling inward. And why did our escort drones withdraw 3 minutes prior to the event? The room went silent. The air grew thick with tension. Serax leaned forward, the metals on his chest clicking softly. "Sensor error," he said dismissively. "The drones malfunctioned. It happens." 4 drones malfunctioning simultaneously at the exact moment of an attack? Lyra raised an eyebrow. That is statistically impossible. "You are young, Lyra," Serax said, his voice dropping to a patronizing purr. "You do not understand the complexities of military hardware, or the depths of human treachery." "Show her," the High Treasurer muttered. Serax nodded to a guard in the shadows. "Bring him in." The heavy doors at the far end of the chamber hissed open. 2 armored guards dragged a man between them. He was human, and he looked like he had been through hell. His flight suit was scorched and torn, stained with dried blood. One of his eyes was swollen shut, and he favored his left leg as they forced him to stand. Shackles bound his wrists and ankles, clanking heavily against the polished floor. "This," Serax announced, gesturing to the prisoner, "is Dr. Elias Ward, one of the few survivors found in a life pod near the wreckage, and a known associate of the Terra First Vanguard." The guards shoved Elias forward. He stumbled but caught himself, straightening his spine with a groan of pain. He looked up, his one good eye burning with a defiant blue fire. He looked at the Admiral, then at the Intelligence Minister, and finally, his gaze landed on Lyra. For a heartbeat, the universe seemed to narrow down to the 2 of them. Lyra saw a man who was exhausted beyond measure, a man who had seen his world end only hours ago. But she did not see a fanatic. She saw raw, gaping grief and a fury so hot it could melt steel. Elias looked at the alien woman sitting at the table. She was beautiful, terrifyingly so, glowing like a bioluminescent orchid. But unlike the others, whose faces were masks of disdain, her expression was open. She was looking at him, not through him. "Tell them," Lyra said softly, breaking the silence. "Tell us what happened. Dr. Ward." Elias spat a mouthful of blood onto the pristine floor. Serax flinched in disgust. "I am a combat medic," Elias rasped, his voice rough from smoke inhalation. "I served on the Aegis for 2 years. There were no bombs. There were no terrorists." "Lies," the Intelligence Minister hissed. "We were hailed," Elias continued, ignoring him. "I was on the comms link in the triage center. A voice came through the secure channel. It gave the order to drop shields." "And who gave this order?" Lyra asked, leaning forward. Elias locked eyes with her again. "It was an Imperial frequency. The encryption key was yours, and when the captain refused, your ships decloaked and butchered us." Serax slammed his fist onto the table. "Enough of this slander. The human is delirious. Take him to the holding cells. We will extract the truth from him later." "No." Lyra stood up, her voice ringing clear. "He is a witness. He is an enemy combatant," Serax roared. "He is a survivor of a tragedy that happened in our space," Lyra shot back. "If we silence him, we validate every accusation the Federation makes." Serax stared at her, his jaw working. He looked like he wanted to strike her, but the presence of the recording devices, even in a closed session, stayed in his hand. "Very well," Serax said, his voice icy. "He stays in custody. but do not think his lies will save him from execution. Princess. The guards hauled Elias away. As he was dragged backward, he kept his eyes on Lyra until the doors slid shut, severing the connection. Lyra sat back down, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had just publicly challenged the most powerful military leader in the Empire. And worse, she believed in humans. The walk to the Empress's private garden was long and quiet. Lyra's mind was racing, replaying the look in Elias Ward's eye. There was no deception there, only the hard, brutal clarity of a man with nothing left to lose. Her mother was waiting for her by the pond, feeding the luminous koi that swam in the ink-black water. The Empress was a towering figure of grace, her skin a deep, royal amethyst, her robes woven from spider silk and starlight. "You were loud today, Lyra," the Empress said without turning around. "I was asking questions. Mother, you were challenging your uncle." The Empress turned, her face unreadable. "The military is on edge. The humans are mobilizing their fleets. We are on the brink of a second galactic war. Now is not the time for division within the royal house." Lyra stepped closer. "That is exactly why I must ask questions. If Serax provoked this, Serax does what is necessary to protect the ascendancy." The Empress cuts her off. Her tone was not angry, but it was final. "You are a symbol, Lyra. You represent unity, hope, and the cultural superiority of our people. You are not a detective. You are not a judge. So I should just smile and wave while we slaughter doctors and children?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. "You will do your duty," the Empress said. "You will attend the memorial service tomorrow. You will stand by your uncle. And you will let the military handle the prisoner. Do you understand?" Lyra looked at her mother, seeing the exhaustion hidden behind the royal mask. The Empress was afraid of the war, afraid of the military faction that held the real power. "I understand, Mother," Lyra lied. The Empress sighed and reached out to stroke Lyra's cheek. "Good. Stay out of the dungeons, Lyra. There is nothing there but darkness." Lyra did not stay out of the dungeons. 2 hours later, she was swept into the high-security detention block. She wore her formal diplomatic sash, a visual reminder of her rank that made the prison guards snap to rigid attention. "Open cell block 4, she commanded. "No, Your Highness," the warden stammered. Admiral Serax gave strict orders. "I am the Princess of the Ascendancy," Lyra said, infusing her voice with the imperious tone she usually saved for boring state dinners. "Are you suggesting the Admiral's authority supersedes the crown?" The warden paled. "Of course not, Highness. But the prisoner is dangerous." "I have brought my personal guard," Lyra said, gesturing to the 2 heavily armed sentinels behind her. "And I am here to conduct a diplomatic assessment of his mental state before his trial." "Open the door." The warden hesitated, then typed the code. The heavy blast door hissed open. Lyra stepped inside, signaling for her guards to wait in the corridor. "Leave us. Turn off the audio recording. I need him to speak freely." The door closed behind her, sealing her in the small, sterile room. Elias Ward was sitting on the narrow bunk, staring at the blank metal wall. He had been cleaned up slightly. The blood was wiped from his face, but his eye was still a mess of purple and blue bruising. He looked up as she entered, and his expression hardened. "Here to gloat?" he asked, his voice rasping. "Or did you come to watch the show before the execution?" Lyra ignored the barb. She placed a small silver case on the table. It unfolded to reveal a high-end medical regenerator and a nutrient pack. "I brought you something for the pain," she said, keeping her distance, "and food that is not processed algae paste." Elias looked at the kit, Then at her. Why? Because I do not like being lied to, Lyra said, and I think everyone in that council room was lying except for you. Elias let out a dry, bitter laugh. The Empire's favorite scapegoat finds a fan. Lucky me. Lyra crossed her arms. You are remarkably mouthy for a condemned man. Elias winced as he moved his leg. When you have watched 3,000 people turn into ice crystals in the span of 10 seconds. Royal protocol seems a bit redundant. Princess? Lyra flinched. The image was visceral. She picked up the medical regenerator. May I? Elias hesitated, then nodded slowly. He pulled back the torn sleeve of his flight suit, revealing a deep, jagged laceration on his forearm. Lyra activated the device. A soft blue light hummed over the wound, knitting the tissue back together. The relief on Elias's face was instant. Thank you, he muttered. Lyra worked in silence for a moment. Tell me about the weapons, she said softly. You said the signatures were familiar. Elias watched her hands. They were elegant, alien yet gentle. They were pulsars, he said, rapid-fire phased pulsars. The Federation uses distinct red beams. These were green, high frequency, the sound they make when they hit the hull. It is a specific whine. I heard it once before, during the border skirmishes 5 years ago. It is Imperial tech, no doubt. Lyra's stomach turned. Phased pulsars were standard issue for the Black Fleet, the covert operations wing under her uncle's direct command. And the escorts, she asked. They did not just leave, Elias said, meeting her gaze. They formed a perimeter. They were not retreating. They were clearing the firing line. They made sure no stray shots hit the drones. They were protecting the assets, not the hospital ship. The logic was cold and undeniable. It aligned perfectly with the data she had seen. My AI flagged something, Lyra admitted quietly. A recall order sent on a high-priority military channel. It was encrypted, but the timestamp matches your story. Elias studied her. He saw the conflict in her posture, the way her light dimmed with shame. Why are you doing this? He asked. You are one of them. Lyra deactivated the healer and stepped back. Because if my family did this, if we burned a ship of healers to start a war for profit, then we do not deserve to rule. We do not even deserve to survive. The honesty in her voice hung in the air between them. For the first time, the tension in Elias's shoulders dropped. Be careful, Princess, he said. The people who did this. They won't hesitate to remove a loose end, even a royal one. I know, Lyra said. She turned to the door. Eat the food, Dr. Ward. You will need your strength. As she walked out, she felt his eyes on her back. It was a strange sensation, a mix of judgment and a fragile, budding hope. Lyra returned to her private chambers, her mind a whirlwind. She dismissed her attendants and activated the privacy field around her desk. Aura, she whispered to the AI embedded in her wrist bracelet. Show me the data package from the technician. Accessing. The cool voice of the AI responded. Note, this data was obtained via an unauthorized tap on the sensor array of Outpost 9. A holographic map of the sector materialized in the air. It showed the Aegis of Mercy as a blue dot. Then, red dots appeared, the attacking ships. The official report claimed the ships came from the chaotic gloom of the Badlands. But the sensor ghost data, the raw feed that had not been scrubbed by Serax's sensors, showed a different origin point. They came from the staging ground of the 7th Fleet, Lyra whispered. They came from our own backyard. Analysis confirms. Aura said, warp signatures match the engine profiles of the Shadow-class frigates docked at Prime Naval Base. Lyra sat back, the horror of it sinking in. It was not just a rogue commander, it was a sanctioned operation. Her uncle, the Grand Admiral, had ordered the mass murder of helpless humans to manufacture a casus belli. He wanted a war to expand the Empire's borders and fill the coffers of the arms guilds. She stood up and walked to the balcony. The night air was cool. Below her, the city was lit up in somber blue and white, the colors of mourning. A massive holographic memorial floated above the central plaza, scrolling the names of the 3,000 dead. She watched the names flicker by. Smith, Nguyen, Adebayo, Kovalenko. Human names. Names of people who had families, dreams, and lives that were snuffed out to balance a spreadsheet in her uncle's office. She looked at her hands. They were shaking. She could stay silent. She could listen to her mother, marry a safe duke, and live a life of luxury while the galaxy burned. It would be easy. But she closed her eyes and saw Elias Ward's face. She saw the crayon drawing being sucked into the vacuum. If I stay silent, Lyra whispers to the wind, I am no better than the man who gave the order. Her skin flared with a bright, resolute gold light. The fear was still there, but it was being consumed by a cold, hard resolve. The next morning, the council chamber was full. The Empress was present, seated on the raised throne, looking weary. Sarax was in the middle of a speech about necessary security measures and mobilizing the fleet for defensive actions. Therefore, we must strike the human outposts in the DMZ before they can launch another terror attack. Sarax boomed, his fist pounding the table. Lyra stood up. The movement was sudden, interrupting the Admiral's rhythm. The room turned to look at her. Sit down, Lyra, the Empress said softly. No. Mother. Lyra walked to the center of the room. Her robes flowed around her like liquid moonlight. She looked at Sarax, then at the assembled ministers, and finally at the camera drones broadcasting the session to the inner circle of the nobility. We are speaking of war, Lyra said, her voice calm and projecting to every corner of the hall. We are speaking of sending our sons and daughters to die because of a tragedy. But a war built on a lie is not a victory. It is a crime. Lyra, Sarax warned, his voice a low growl. I have reviewed the sensor logs, Lyra continued, raising her voice. I have seen the discrepancies. The weapons used were Imperial. The escort drones were recalled by Imperial codes. And the survivor, Dr. Ward, has provided testimony that contradicts every word of the official report. She turned to the Empress, bowing her head respectfully but keeping her back rigid. If we are innocent, we have nothing to hide. If the humans are the monsters we claim they are, let the evidence prove it. She lifted her chin, her golden eyes blazing with a challenge that could not be retracted. If we truly believe in this truce, then we will prove it. I demand a full, independent investigation into the destruction of the human hospital ship. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy with the weight of a history about to change. Sarax looked as though he wanted to strangle her. The Empress looked horrified, but Lyra did not flinch. The game had begun. The silence that followed Lyra's demand was not the silence of contemplation. It was the vacuum before a hull breach, the breathless instant before the atmosphere was violently sucked away. Grand Admiral Sarax did not shout. He did not pound the table again. Instead, he leaned back in his obsidian chair, his heavy violet features composing themselves into a mask of pitying indulgence. He looked at the Empress, then at the assembled ministers, and finally settled his gaze on Lyra with the weight of a disappointed parent. It is a tragedy, Sarax said, his voice smooth and resonant, filling the cavernous chamber. Not just the loss of the ship, but the loss of perspective. To think that our own princess has been so thoroughly compromised by enemy disinformation. Lyra stiffened, her hands gripping the edge of the council table. Disinformation? I am speaking of sensor logs. Uncle, I am speaking of physics. You are speaking of shadows cast by grief. Sarax countered gently. We all know your heart is vast. Lyra, it is your greatest strength. But the humans know it too. They have played upon your empathy, feeding you fabricated data and sob stories to sow discord within this very room. The Minister of Intelligence nodded in agreement. The human prisoner is a trained operative. Highness, psychological manipulation is their specialty. By demanding this investigation, you are doing exactly what the terrorists want. You are showing the galaxy that the Imperial House is divided. I am showing the galaxy that we have a conscience, Lyra snapped, her bioluminescent skin flashing a brighter shade of lavender, betraying her rising temper. Enough, the Empress said. The word was spoken softly, but it carried the absolute authority of the throne. The Empress stood, her long robes shimmering like liquid mercury. She looked at Sarax, a warning in her eyes, and then turned to her daughter. Lyra, your accusation is grave. To suggest that the Admiralty would slaughter civilians is to strike at the foundation of our society. Then let me prove it is false, Lyra pleaded. Give me the resources to clear our name. Or are you afraid of what I might find? A ripple of shock went through the council. One did not question the courage of the Empress. The Empress walked slowly down the steps of the dais until she stood face to face with Lyra. For a moment, the political theater vanished, replaced by a silent, tense communication between mother and daughter. The Empress saw the resolve in Lyra's golden eyes, a stubbornness that mirrored her own. Very well, the Empress said, her voice cold and formal. To silence these rumors and restore public trust, I grant you limited authority to review the incident files. You may conduct a personal inquiry. Sarax began to protest. Your Majesty, this is... However, the Empress continued, raising a hand to silence him. This is not a military tribunal. You are not a soldier. Lyra, you will conduct this review quietly within the palace. You will not speak to the press. You will not leave the capital. And you will report your findings only to me. Lyra bowed her head. Thank you, Mother. Do not thank me yet, the Empress murmured as she leaned in close, her voice dropping so only Lyra could hear. You are walking on a razor's edge, child. If you embarrass this family, I cannot protect you from the consequences. As the council adjourned and the ministers filed out, casting wary glances at the princess, the Empress signaled to her chief of staff. She did not look at Lyra as she gave the order in a hushed tone. Assign a detail to the princess. Shadow her. I want to know every file she opens, every door she walks through, and every word she speaks. If she steps 1 micrometer out of line, lock her down. The interrogation room in the detention block was stark, smelling of ozone and fear. Elias Ward sat at the metal table, his shackles clinking softly as he shifted. He had been expecting torture, or perhaps a summary execution. He had not expected the door to slide open and reveal the Princess of the Ascendancy, followed by 2 towering guards. And he certainly had not expected what she did next. Leave us, Lyra commanded. The guards hesitated. Highness, the prisoner is handcuffed and injured, Lyra finished. Unless you believe I cannot handle a human with 1 good leg and a bruised ribcage, you will wait outside. Disable the audio feed. The guards exchanged a look but obeyed, retreating into the corridor. The door hissed shut, sealing them in. Lyra let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since the morning. She walked to the far side of the table but did not sit. She paced, the fabric of her gown whispering against the floor. Elias watched her, his good eyes narrowing. "This is a new technique," he rasped, his voice still rough. "The good cop routine usually involves a cigarette and a glass of water, not a royal decree." "I do not know what a cigarette is," Lyra said, stopping her pacing to look at him. "But if you require water, I can arrange it." Elias leaned back, wincing as his ribs protested. "I require a lawyer, or a ship, but since I am guessing both are out of stock, I will settle for knowing why you are here. Did the Admiral send you to see if I have broken yet?" Lyra placed her hands on the table, leaning in. Her golden eyes were intense, stripping away his sarcasm. "I stood before the High Council 2 hours ago," she said quietly. "I called my uncle a liar and accused the Empire of mass murder. I staked my title, my reputation, and perhaps my life on the belief that you are telling the truth. So do not waste my time with snark. Dr. Ward." Elias stared at her. The defiance in his posture slipped, replaced by a stunned caution. "You did what?" "I have been granted a limited warrant to investigate," Lyra said. "But I need more than your word. I need details. The official report says the Aegis of Mercy suffered a reactor containment failure caused by sabotage. They have debris analysis that shows traces of human-grade explosives." "That is impossible," Elias said, shaking his head. "We vented the reactor core the moment the attack started. Standard protocol. It was cold. And the explosives. If they found traces, it is because they planted them on the wreckage afterward." Lyra nodded, absorbing this. "That matches my theory. But I need proof. The navigation logs." "Destroyed," Elias said. "The bridge was vaporized in the first volley." Lyra drummed her fingers on the metal surface. "Not all of them. The Ascendancy uses a passive tracking relay for all ships in the demilitarized zone. Even if your ship was destroyed, the data packet would have been bounced to the nearest relay buoy before the explosion." Elias looked at her, a strange expression crossing his face, a mixture of respect and suspicion. "You know a lot about sensor grids for a princess. I thought you just cut ribbons and waved at parades." "I read," Lyra said coolly, "and I listen, which is more than I can say for most of my species when it comes to yours." She pulled a datapad from her sash and slid it across the table. "Draw the formation," she ordered. "Show me exactly where the escorts were when they broke off." Elias looked at the pad, then at his bound hands. "It is a bit hard to draw with 20 pounds of steel on my wrists." Lyra hesitated. She reached into her sash and pulled out a small magnetic key. She stepped around the table. "If you attack me," she said, her voice steady, "the guards will turn you into ash before you take 2 steps. I am a doctor," Elias said dryly. "I patch holes. I don't make them." Lyra unlocked the cuffs. The heavy metal clattered to the table. Elias rubbed his wrists, grimacing at the raw skin. He looked up at her, and for a moment, the distance between them, alien and human, royal and prisoner, felt vanishingly small. "Thank you," he muttered. He picked up the stylus and began to sketch rapidly on the pad. "Here," he pointed. "We were traversing Sector 7. The drone escort was in a diamond formation. At 1400 hours, they didn't just turn around. They accelerated on a vector of 210, towards the Krellian border." Lyra watched the lines form. 210. That is a direct line to the Imperial traffic control buoy. "Exactly," Elias said. "They were not malfunctioning. They were being guided home." Lyra took the pad back, staring at the diagram. It was precise, professional. It was the work of a man who paid attention. This room is insufficient, Lyra decided suddenly. Elias blinked. I'm sorry the decor doesn't meet royal standards. I will ask the warden for some throw pillows. Lyra ignored the joke. I cannot work here. The surveillance is too tight, even with the audio off, and you look like you are about to collapse. She walked to the door and hit the intercom. Guards. Prepare the prisoner for transport. Transport? The voice of the guard crackled through the speaker. To where? Highness? The Royal Medical Wing, Lyra said. I am declaring him mentally unstable and unfit for standard confinement. He requires specialized neurological evaluation, under my direct supervision. Elias's jaw dropped. Unstable? Would you prefer dead? Lyra whispered as the door hissed open. Because that is the alternative if you stay here. The transfer was a bureaucratic nightmare that Lyra navigated with the ease of someone born to command. Within an hour, Elias was stripped of his prison jumpsuit, dressed in clean, sterile medical scrubs, and escorted through the heart of the imperial palace. It was a surreal procession. Elias, flanked by 4 guards, limped alongside the princess. Lyra had summoned her personal detail, a towering warrior named Kale who wore the platinum armor of the Praetorian Guard. Kale was Lyra's shadow. He had been her protector since she was a child, and he looked at Elias with the sort of profound distrust a wolf might have for a coyote. He walks slowly. Kale rumbles, his voice deep and gravelly. He has 3 fractured ribs and a torn ligament. Lyra replied sharply. Patience. Kale. They moved out of the high-security zones and into the residential sectors. The transition was jarring. They passed through corridors lined with singing crystals that hummed in harmony as they walked. They crossed bridges of transparent glass suspended over indoor gardens where flora from a dozen worlds grew in violet twilight. Elias looked around, wide-eyed. It is excessive. It is history, Lyra corrected. Every plant here was a gift from a system brought into the fold. Brought into the fold, Elias repeated. Is that the polite term for conquest? Lyra stiffened but did not reply. They were walking along a narrow gallery overlooking the Hall of Ancestors. The floor was polished marble, slick and reflective. Elias, distracted by a floating sculpture of liquid metal, missed a step. His bad leg buckled. He pitched forward with a sharp intake of breath. Lyra moved before the guards could react. She caught him, her arm hooking around his waist, taking his weight. Careful, she said. For a second, they were frozen. Elias was pressed against her side. Through the thin fabric of his scrubs and her silk gown, the contact was electric. Lyra's species was sensitive to touch. Their bioluminescence was an evolutionary signal of emotion. As Elias gripped her arm to steady himself, a flush of heat radiated from her skin. The soft lavender glow of her arms flared into a brilliant, pulsing indigo. Elias felt the heat. It wasn't just warm, it was a physical wave of energy that seemed to vibrate against his ribs. He looked up, startled, and found her face inches from his. Her pupils had dilated, turning her golden eyes into pools of black ink. The air between them suddenly felt very thin. Elias could smell her scent, something like ozone and crushed rain lilies. He felt the strength in her slender frame, a deceptive power that belied her elegance. You glow, he stammered, the sarcasm completely gone from his voice. Lyra blinked rapidly, realizing the intimacy of the moment. She pulled back, though she kept a steadying hand on his elbow. Her skin dimmed, but a faint, flustered pink hue remained on her cheeks. It is a physiological response, she said, her voice uncharacteristically high. To stress or sudden exertion. Right, Elias said, straightening up and clearing his throat. Stress. Of course, rescuing enemy humans in royal hallways is very stressful work. Kale stepped between them, his hand resting casually on the hilt of his shock baton. Perhaps the prisoner should watch his feet instead of the scenery. Lyra smoothed her robes, regaining her composure. Come. The medical wing is just ahead. She walked faster now, putting distance between them. But Elias noticed she didn't look back. And he could still feel the ghost of that strange alien heat on his side. The secure medical facility was a suite of rooms that was nicer than any apartment Elias had ever lived in. Once the guards were posted outside and Kale had secured the perimeter, Lyra activated the privacy shielding. All right, she said, turning to business. We are safe here. She raised her wrist. Aura, wake up. A small holographic avatar projected from her bracelet, a swirling sphere of light. I am active, Highness, and I must protest. The amount of regulations we are currently violating is staggering. Add it to the list, Lyra said. Aura, this is Dr. Ward. Give him access to the data shell. The sphere floated over to a terminal. Access granted. Hello, Dr. Ward. Please do not bleed on the interface. Lyra, Elias, and Kale gathered around the holographic table. For the next 4 hours, they worked. Elias cross-referenced the navigation charts Lyra had stolen from the lower-level servers. Here, Elias said, pointing to a discrepancy. The Aegis was scheduled for a standard hyperlane transit. But 6 hours before the attack, we received a mandatory course correction. Order code 77 Delta. Lyra frowned. 77 Delta is a navigational hazard warning. It is used to divert civilian traffic around solar flares or debris fields. There were no flares that day, Elias said. Lyra turned to Kale. Cross-referenced that vector. Where did the diversion send them? Kale tapped the console with his thick fingers. It pushed them out of the trade lane and into Sector 9, specifically the grid coordinates near the Veil Nebula. Sector 9 is a smuggling corridor, Lyra realized, her blood running cold. It is a dead zone for civilian comms. If you want to destroy a ship and make sure no one hears the distress call, that is where you put it. And the order came from Imperial Navigation Command, Elias added. Lyra paced the room. It is not enough. Navigation orders can be faked. We need the origin point. We need to know who authorized the 77 Delta. That information is Level 1 classified. Aura chimed in. It is stored in the Central Military Archive. It is air-gapped. You cannot hack it from here. Lyra stopped pacing. She looked at the floor, as if she could see through the layers of the palace to the bedrock beneath. The Central Archive, she murmured. It is in the sub-basement. Kale groaned. Highness. No. It requires an admiral's retinal scan and 3 royal biosignatures to enter, Lyra said, ignoring him. Or Kale said, crossing his massive arms. One very stubborn princess who knows that the maintenance shafts for the cooling system bypass the main airlock. Lyra smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. You remember the time we snuck down there to steal the reserve wine for my 16th birthday? I remember we almost got incinerated by the heat exchangers. Kyle grunted. And this time, there will be sentry bots. Elias looked between them. Wait, are we talking about breaking into the most secure data vault in the Empire? Yes, Lyra said. And how exactly do you plan to get a human prisoner and a 7-foot guard past the internal security grid? Lyra's eyes gleamed. Tomorrow, the Terran diplomatic envoy arrives for the peace talks. They are scheduled for a cultural tour of the palace. Security will be focused on the upper levels. We are going to create a diversion. The plan was madness. It was desperate, reckless and entirely undignified. Elias found himself folded into the bottom shelf of a hover cart piled high with ceremonial linens. The smell of lavender detergent was overpowering. "I cannot believe this," he muttered into the dark fabric. "I am a doctor of xenobiology. I have 2 PhDs, and I am hiding in the laundry." "Hush." Lyra's voice came through the small comms bead in his ear. "We are approaching the service elevator." Lyra was walking alongside the cart, dressed in her most elaborate, restrictive ceremonial gown. She looked every inch the pampered royal. Kale was pushing the cart, wearing the uniform of a logistics officer. "Halt!" A security droid blocked their path. "Identification." Lyra stepped forward, throwing her hands up. "Do you have any idea how late we are? The Terran ambassador is expecting the Grand Tapestry in the East Wing in 5 minutes. If this cart is not there, I will personally see to it that you are reprogrammed to scrub the waste recyclers." The droid processed this. "Royal biometric confirmed. Stress levels high. Recommendation: do not impede. Move!" Lyra snapped at Kale. Kale grunted, shoving the cart past the droid. As soon as the elevator doors closed, Elias poked his head out from under a pile of purple silk. "You are terrifying when you want to be," he said. "Practice," Lyra said, though her hands were trembling. They descended, down past the dungeons, past the engineering decks, into the cool, silent bedrock of the palace. The elevator opened into a maintenance corridor. Kyle checked the scanner. 2 guards at the end of the hall. "Leave them to me," Kyle said. He pulled a small device from his pocket, a sonic emitter. He rolled it down the hallway. It clattered against the wall and then emitted the distinct sound of a plasma conduit rupturing. A high-pitched screech followed by the hiss of escaping gas. The guards panicked. "Breach! Sector 4! As they ran toward the noise, Kyle, Lyra, and Elias slipped into the ventilation access. The crawl was brutal. The shafts were cramped and hot. Elias struggled with his bad leg, dragging himself forward on his elbows. Lyra was ahead of him, her gown ruined, her silver hair plastered to her neck with sweat. They dropped down into the anteroom of the archive. It was a massive circular chamber filled with towering server banks that hummed with the collective memory of the Empire. Lyra rushed to the central interface console. She pulled a cable from her wrist bracelet, a direct neural link. "Keep watch," she ordered. She plugged in. Her eyes rolled back, glowing a fierce white as her consciousness merged with the data stream. Elias stood back to back with Kyle, watching the door. "How long?" Elias whispered. "Long enough for her to burn her brain out if she is not careful." Kale growled. Inside the digital construct, Lyra swam through oceans of redacted black ink. She hunted for the date, the ship's name, the order code, found it. File 99 Omega, subject HSS, Aegis of Mercy. She pulled the file open. It wasn't a navigation error. It was a targeting package. The order had been cut 3 days before the attack. The ship had been marked as a high-value asset for a live fire exercise. Authorized by, redacted countersigned by, Office of the Grand Admiral. And there was something else. A secondary communication. A transfer of funds, trillions of credits, from a shell company called Vanguard Systems to a private account in the Cayman Nebula. Vanguard Systems, the largest arms manufacturer in the galaxy. Lyra downloaded everything. She felt the heavy weight of the data settle into her bracelet's memory core. Suddenly, the room turned red. Unauthorized access detected. A mechanical voice boomed. "Lockdown initiated." Lyra ripped the cable from her wrist, gasping as she stumbled back into reality. "Run!" she screamed. Heavy blast shutters began to slam down over the exits. Kale grabbed Elias by the back of his scrubs and threw him toward the maintenance hatch. Lyra dove after them just as the main door sealed with a deafening clang. They were in the secondary cooling shaft now. Steam hissed from ruptured pipes as the security system tried to flush them out. "Up!" Cale roared, pointing to a ladder. They climbed. Elias's leg was screaming in agony. He slipped, his grip failing on the slick rungs. Lyra caught his hand. Her grip was iron. "Do not let go!" she yelled over the roar of the alarms. She hauled him up, her strength surprising him again. They scrambled onto a catwalk, sparks raining down from the ceiling as security lasers cut through the grating behind them. They sprinted through the twisting maze of pipes until they found a dead-end alcove hidden behind a massive atmospheric recycler. Cale jammed the door mechanism with a steel bar. "Safe," Cale panted, sliding down the wall. For a moment, Lyra and Elias stood in the dark. Cramped space, chests heaving. They were covered in soot and grease. Lyra's ceremonial gown was shredded at the hem. "You are insane," Elias wheezed, leaning against the vibrating machinery. "You almost got us killed." "We got the data," Lyra shot back, wiping a smudge of oil from her cheek. "You risked your life for a file." Elias stepped closer, his anger flaring. "Do you understand what happens if they catch you? They won't just ground you. Lyra, they will silence you. An accident, a shuttle crash, a sudden illness. I do not care." Lyra stepped into his space, her eyes blazing. "I care!" Elias yelled, the echo bouncing around the metal walls. "I care if you die." The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. They were inches apart. The adrenaline of the escape was crashing into something else, something primal and terrifying. Elias looked at her. Really looked at her. The fierce intelligence, the glowing skin, the absolute refusal to look away. Lyra felt his fear, and beneath it, a desperate, protective need. Her skin began to hum again, the bioluminescence flaring soft and warm in the darkness of the alcove. Without thinking, Elias reached out, his hand brushing her cheek. Her skin was hot to the touch, smoother than anything he had ever felt. Lyra's breath hitched. She leaned into his touch, just for a fraction of a second. Her lips parted. The universe outside, the politics, the war, the danger, ceased to exist. There was only the heat of his hand and the pounding of her own heart. She looked at his mouth. It would be so easy, so terribly, beautifully wrong. Then the reality of their situation crashed back in. She was a princess. He was a fugitive, and thousands of people were dead. Lyra pulled back, her hand trembling as she pushed a stray lock of silver hair behind her ear. Her cheeks were glowing a brilliant, flustered violet. "This is," she whispered, her voice shaky, "neither the time nor the species for such distractions." Elias dropped his hand, swallowing hard. Right. Bad timing. He looked away, running a hand through his hair, trying to steady his breathing. But the air in the alcove remained thick with the electricity of what almost happened. Lyra turned to her bracelet, projecting the stolen data onto the rusted wall. She needed to focus. She needed to be cold. "Look," she said, pointing to the scrolling text. "The signature. It was partially encrypted, but the header was clear. The order to redirect the hospital ship had originated from a secure terminal in Admiral Sarax's private estate. And the funding. Vanguard Systems," Elias read. "They make the warp drives for the new dreadnoughts." "If the war restarts," Lyra said, her voice hardening, "Vanguard stands to make quadrillions. They sell the weapons to us, and through shell companies, they sell the shields to you. They destroyed a hospital ship to bump their stock price," Elias said, his voice hollow with disgust. Lyra looked at the glowing text, her expression transforming. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. In its place was the cold fury of a ruler who had found the rot in her kingdom. This was no accident, she said, and it was not just Serax. It is an industry. She looked at Elias and then at Kale. We are not going back to the medical wing, she said. Where are we going? Kyle asked, hefting his weapon. Lyra looked at the schematics of the palace, plotting a route to the hangar bay. We are going to burn them down, she vowed, every single one of them. The whispers started in the lower levels of the Imperial City, carried by service droids and tired dock workers. They spoke of a data breach, of a ghost in the machine that had flagged the destruction of the Aegis of Mercy not as a tragedy, but as a transaction. The rumors were smoke, curling upward toward the crystalline spires of the palace, but smoke usually meant fire. Princess Lyra intended to be the spark. She stood once again in the center of the High Council chamber. This time, she did not come with questions. She came with the fragmented data she had torn from the archives, the partial order codes, the financial transfers to Vanguard systems, and the redacted communications from her uncle's office. The chamber was colder than usual. The Empress sat frozen on her throne, her face a mask of porcelain resolve. Grand Admiral Serax did not sit. He stood by the window, looking out at the sprawling capital, his back to Lyra as she spoke. The timestamp on this transfer matches the exact moment the hospital ship was rerouted, Lyra said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Vanguard Systems received a payment of 4 trillion credits from a black budget account linked to the Admiralty. 2 days later, their stock surged on the speculation of renewed hostilities. She projected the hologram into the center of the room. It flickered, incomplete, damaged from the emergency disconnect, but the numbers were damning. This was not a terrorist attack, Lyra declared, looking directly at the Empress. It was a liquidation of human assets to balance a ledger. We murdered doctors to buy warships. Serax turned slowly. He did not look angry. He looked deeply, profoundly disappointed. Is this it? Serax asked, gesturing to the flickering hologram. A corrupted file? A few coincidental banking transfers? It is evidence, Lyra snapped. It is a fabrication, Serax said, his voice smooth as oil. He walked toward the table, addressing the other ministers. We have analyzed the princess's neural logs. It appears she was accessing unsecured nodes that had been seeded with human propaganda. The Federation knows we have a bleeding heart in the palace. They planted these files for her to find. That is a lie, Lyra said, her skin flashing a dangerous, heated violet. Is it? Serax countered. You broke into a secure facility with a human prisoner, a known operative. You let him access our network. You let him guide your hand. How do we know he did not upload this evidence himself while you were distracted by your sympathy for him? The insinuation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The Minister of Defense stood up. Highness, the Admiral makes a valid point. You are not a cipher analyst. You have been spending a great deal of time with humans. Stockholm Syndrome is a documented phenomenon. Lyra looked at her mother. Mother, look at the data. Look at the truth. The Empress closed her eyes for a long second. When she opened them, they were hard. The Empire cannot be governed by conspiracy theories. Lyra, but... Silence, the Empress commanded. She stood, signaling the end of the session. The integrity of this council has been compromised. We cannot have a member of the royal family acting as a mouthpiece for enemy intelligence. Serax smiled, a microscopic curling of his lip. Effective immediately, the Empress said, her voice devoid of warmth. Your investigative authority is revoked. You are confined to the palace grounds for your own safety. Your comms will be monitored. You are done. Lyra. Lyra felt the floor drop out from under her. It was not just a defeat, it was a burial. The private garden was usually Lyra's sanctuary, a place of silence and bioluminescent orchids. Now, it felt like a cage. The energy barrier shimmered above the walls, a subtle reminder that she was a prisoner in her own home. Elias Ward paced the stone path, his limp less pronounced after 3 days of high-grade medical treatment. He watched Lyra, who sat on a stone bench, staring at a fountain where water defied gravity, flowing upward in spiral stream. "They are going to kill me," Elias said. He stated it as a fact, devoid of panic. Lyra did not look up. "They are not going to kill you, they are just containing the situation." Elias stopped pacing and laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Lyra, wake up! You poked the bear. You showed them you have teeth and they just pulled them out. Now they have to clean up the mess. I am a mess." He walked over to her, kneeling so he could look into her face. "We have to leave," he said urgently. "Leave?" Lyra looked at him, her golden eyes dull. "There is a shield grid over the palace. My own mother has placed guards at every exit. We can find a way," Elias insisted. "You know the service routes. You know the blind spots. If we can get to a shuttle, we can make a run for the Federation border." "And then what?" Lyra asked bitterly. "I arrive in human space as a defector? Your politicians are no better than mine. Elias, they will use me. I will be a trophy. Look, even the alien princess hates her own people. I will be a tool for their propaganda, and nothing will change. So you would rather stay here and let them execute me?" Elias snapped. "I am trying to save you." Lyra stood up, her frustration boiling over. "I am trying to find a legal way to—" "There is no legal way," Elias shouted, standing to meet her. "The law is what Serac says it is." They stood chest to chest, breathing hard. The tension that had been building since the archives, the fear, the anger, the proximity, was threatening to explode. "You think this is easy for me?" Lyra whispered, her voice shaking. "Do you think I enjoy tearing my family apart? I have spent my entire life in this palace. I have been the perfect daughter, the perfect symbol. And for what? To realize that the people I loved are monsters?" Her voice cracked. "I am alone. Elias. I have always been alone in this place. And now the only person who actually tells me the truth is a human who technically should hate me." Elias watched her, the anger draining out of him, replaced by a profound sadness. He saw the crack in her royal armor, the lonely girl hiding beneath the title. "I don't hate you," he said softly. He ran a hand through his hair, looking away. "God knows I should. I watched my friends die because of your fleet. I should want to burn this whole planet down. But," he looked back at her, "but you are the only one who tried to listen. You are the only one who looked at me and saw a person, not a target." Lyra looked down at her hands. "I failed you. I promised justice. And all I got you was a death sentence." Elias stepped closer. He reached out, hesitating, then gently touched her shoulder. "You didn't fail," he said. "You just learned that the game is rigged." He offered a crooked, weak smile. "Besides, if we run, think of the headlines. Dashing human medic kidnaps alien princess. It would be the scandal of the century." Lyra looked up, a small, reluctant smile touching her lips. "You? Kidnap me? You would trip over your own feet trying to get me out the door." Elias feigned offense. "I will have you know I was top of my class in evasion training." "And bottom of your class in stealth," Lyra countered. I recall you hiding in a laundry cart complaining about the smell of lavender. Elias chuckled, but the sound died quickly. His hand was still on her shoulder. The heat of her skin was seeping into his palm, a warm, living reassurance in the cold garden. You are blushing, he noted, seeing the faint pink hue rising on her neck. I am not, Lyra lied, pulling away quickly and smoothing her robes. It is the humidity. Before Elias could respond, the garden gate hissed open. Cale strode in, and for the first time in 20 years, Lyra saw fear on her guard's face. We are out of time, Cale said, his voice low and urgent. What is it? Lyra asked, stepping forward. Cale held up a data pad, a transfer order, signed by the Minister of Justice, authorized by Serax. They are moving Elias back to the military detention block at 1900 hours. That is in 40 minutes, Elias said, his face paling. The order cites new evidence regarding his involvement in the bombing, Cale continued, but I spoke to a contact in transport. The guards assigned to the transfer are Black Fleet operatives, not regulars. Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. They are not going to take him to the prison. No, Cale confirmed grimly. He will be shot while attempting to escape during transit. It is a clean script. No trial, no public outcry, just a dead terrorist. Lyra looked at the data pad, then at the high walls of the palace. She looked at Elias, who was standing very still, waiting for the end. She made a choice. It was not a political choice. It was not a rational choice. It was a choice made of fire. No, she said. Highness? Cale asked. They want an escape attempt? Lyra looked up, her eyes blazing with a terrifying resolve. Then let us give them a real one. The next 20 minutes were a blur of frantic precision. Lyra stripped the identity chip from her wrist bracelet, overriding the tracking protocols with a command code she had stolen from the archives. Cale vanished to secure a route. When he returned, he carried a bundle of clothes. Put this on, he told Elias. It was the uniform of a royal attendant, high-collared silk, a face mask veil, and heavy ceremonial robes. This is ridiculous, Elias muttered as he pulled the silk over his head. It is camouflage, Lyra said, fastening her own cloak. No one looks at the attendants. You are furniture to them. They moved. They walked out of the private chambers and into the main corridor. Lyra walked with her head high, her pace brisk and imperious. Elias followed a step behind, head bowed, carrying a silver case as if it contained jewels. Cale brought up the rear, his hand resting casually on his weapon. They passed the first checkpoint. The guard scanned Lyra's biosignature. Good evening, Highness, the guard said. We are proceeding to the diplomatic hangar, Lyra said smoothly. The Terran ambassador left a gift. I wish to inspect it before it is archived. The guard glanced at Elias. And the attendant? He is carrying the scanning equipment, Lyra said, not missing a beat. Unless you wish to carry it for him. The guard stepped back. Proceed. They kept walking. Elias's heart was hammering against his ribs so hard he was sure they could hear it. He focused on the floor, on the hem of Lyra's gown. Don't trip, he told himself. Don't trip. They reached the hangar bay. The diplomatic shuttle, a sleek, unarmed courier vessel, sat on the pad. Cale keyed the access code. The ramp lowered. Wait, a voice called out. A patrol of 4 soldiers emerged from the shadows of the maintenance bay. Their armor was black, Serax's elites. Stop right there, the lead soldier commanded, raising a heavy blaster rifle. We have a sector alert. All departures are grounded. Lyra turned slowly. I am the princess of the ascendancy. I am not subject to grounding orders. The soldier did not lower his weapon. The Admiral's orders are specific. No one leaves, not even you. and certainly not the human you are trying to smuggle out in a veil. The silence stretched, tight as a bowstring. "Run!" Kale roared. He shoved Lyra and Elias toward the ramp and drew his shock baton, charging the soldiers. "Kale!" Lyra screamed. "Go!" Kale yelled, deflecting a blaster bolt with his vambrace. He slammed into the lead soldier, a mountain of muscle and loyalty. "Get him out of here!" Elias grabbed Lyra's arm and dragged her up the ramp. Blaster fire erupted around them, scoring the hull of the shuttle. They scrambled into the cockpit. Lyra threw herself into the pilot's seat. Her hands flew across the controls, muscle memory taking over. "Strap in!" she yelled. Elias dove into the co-pilot seat, fumbling with the harness. The engines whined to life. Lyra didn't wait for the pre-flight check. She slammed the throttle forward. The shuttle lurched, tearing away from the docking clamp with a screech of tearing metal. They shot out of the hangar bay, shattering the atmospheric shield. The sudden vacuum hit them, but Lyra leveled the ship, blasting toward the upper atmosphere. Warning: the ship's computer drowned. Missile lock detected. Serax wasn't taking chances. 2 interceptor fighters peeled off from the orbital patrol grid, their engines burning blue-hot as they dove to pursue. "Shields!" Lyra shouted. "I'm trying!" Elias yelled back, his fingers dancing over the alien interface. "I don't read Imperial. The blue button. The big one." Elias smashed the button. The ship shuddered as a shield bubble enveloped them, just as a plasma torpedo detonated off their port wing. The impact threw them against their restraints. "Where are we going?" Elias screamed over the roar of the engines. "The smugglers run!" Lyra banked the ship hard to the right, diving into the dense debris field of an old asteroid mining ring. "If we stay in open space, they will catch us. We have to lose them in the junk." The chase was a nightmare of vertigo and near misses. Lyra flew with a reckless, terrifying skill, weaving the small shuttle between tumbling asteroids and derelict mining rigs. The interceptors were faster, but they couldn't maneuver as tightly in the chaos. "Left!" Elias shouted, seeing a chunk of rock spinning toward them. "I see it." Lyra rolled the ship, scraping the belly against the stone. She saw a gap, a narrow hyperspace corridor used by illegal freighters. It was unstable and dangerous, but it was their only way out. "Hold on," she whispered. She punched the drive. The stars elongated into streaks of light. The shuttle groaned, threatening to tear apart, and then they were gone, vanishing into the slipstream. They dropped out of hyperspace 3 hours later in the dust sector, a lawless frontier of abandoned moons and gas clouds. The shuttle was smoking, the port engine sputtering. "We are losing power," Lyra said, her voice tight. "We have to put down." "There." Elias pointed to a gray, craggy moon. "I see a structure. Looks like an old fuel depot." It was a rough landing. The landing gear collapsed on impact, and the shuttle skidded across the rocky surface, throwing up plumes of gray dust before slamming into a snowbank of crystal sand. Silence returned, ringing in their ears. "Are you okay?" Elias asked, unbuckling his harness with shaking hands. Lyra nodded, though she was pale. "I am fine. Kale. Do you think Kale?" She couldn't finish the sentence. Elias looked at her. "He is the toughest thing I have ever seen. If anyone made it, he did." They checked the sensors. The atmosphere was breathable but thin and freezing. Outside, a storm was brewing, not of rain, but of razor-sharp crystal dust that swirled in the wind. "We cannot stay on the ship," Lyra said. "The hull is breached. The heating unit is dead. We will freeze in an hour." They grabbed emergency kits and thermal blankets. They forced the airlock open and stepped out onto the moon. It was a haunting, alien landscape. The depot was a ruin of rusted metal, half buried in the sand, but it was alive. Strange. Bulbous flora grew from the metal, glowing with a soft, pulsating bioluminescence, blues, greens, and purples. The air was filled with floating spores that drifted like fireflies. The wind picked up, howling through the ruins. The crystal dust began to sting their faces. "Inside!" Elias yelled, grabbing Lyra's hand. They ran for the largest structure, a half-collapsed hangar. They ducked inside just as the storm hit in full force, the wind screaming like a banshee outside the thick metal walls. It was pitch black inside, save for the ambient glow of the spores that had drifted in and the faint light from Lyra's skin. It was freezing. The cold was immediate and biting. "Here," Elias said, finding a relatively clean corner behind a stack of crates. They sat down, wrapping the thermal blankets around them. It wasn't enough. The cold seeped through the floor. "We have to share body heat," Elias said, his voice matter-of-fact, though he hesitated. "It is the only way to keep our core temperature up." Lyra didn't argue. She nodded. They huddled together under the blankets. Elias sat with his back to the crate, and Lyra sat between his legs, leaning back against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling the blankets tight. For a long time, they just breathed. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a crushing exhaustion and the raw reality of what they had done. "We are fugitives," Lyra whispered into the dark. "We are alive," Elias corrected. He could feel her shivering. Or maybe he was shivering. It was hard to tell where he ended and she began. Lyra looked at her hands. In the darkness, the phosphorescent spores were settling on her skin, reacting with her natural bioluminescence. She looked like she was made of stars. Elias looked down at her. The scent of ozone and rain lilies was stronger now, mixed with the metallic tang of the ship. "I'm sorry," Lyra said softly. "For saving my life?" Elias asked. "For dragging you into this, for Kale, for everything?" Elias tightened his arms around her. "Stop. You didn't drag me anywhere. I chose to get on that ship." He rested his chin on the top of her head. "You know, back on Aegis. We used to joke about the royals. We thought you were all ice-cold statues who lived in towers and didn't know how to bleed." Lyra turned her head slightly, looking up at him. "And now? Now I know you bleed just like us," Elias said, "and you fly like a maniac." Lyra let out a soft, wet laugh. "I was top of my class in piloting too." The humor faded, replaced by a heavy, charged silence. The wind howled outside, but in the small cocoon of the blankets, it was quiet. Lyra shifted, turning in his arms so she was facing him. Their faces were inches apart. The glow from her skin illuminated his tired features, the bruise on his cheek, the intense blue of his eyes. "Why did you really stay?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "In the garden. You could have tried to run alone. I couldn't leave you," Elias admitted. The words hung there, naked and true. "Why?" "Because," Elias whispered, his gaze dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes. "Because you are the only thing in this galaxy that makes sense anymore." Lyra's breath hitched. Her heart was pounding against his chest. She knew this was wrong. She was a princess of the Ascendancy. He was a human accused of terrorism. A relationship was impossible. It was treason. It was madness. But looking at him, feeling the warmth of his body against hers in the freezing dark, none of that mattered. "Screw the protocols," she murmured. She leaned in. Elias didn't pull away. He met her halfway. Her lips were soft and warmer than he expected. The kiss was tentative at first, a question asked in the dark, but as their mouths met, the dam broke. The fear, the grief, the adrenaline, it all poured into the kiss, turning it desperate and hungry. Elias's hand came up to cup her glowing cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. Lyra's fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, deepening the kiss. A jolt of heat, real searing heat, flashed through them. It was terrifying, and it was electric. Lyra pulled back first, gasping for air. Her skin was blazing now, a bright, flushed orchid color that lit up the alcove. She stared at him, wide-eyed. I shouldn't have. Elias was breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers. Don't apologize. Please don't apologize. Lyra closed her eyes. If I do this, if I let myself want this, I am afraid I will choose you over my duty, over the people I need to save. She opened her eyes and they were filled with tears. I cannot be selfish, Elias. Thousands are dead. If I choose you, I betray them. Elias looked at her, his heart breaking. He wanted to tell her to be selfish. He wanted to tell her to run away with him and leave the galaxy to rot. But he knew her. He knew that if she walked away from the fight, the guilt would destroy her. I won't ask you to choose, he whispered, his voice rough, I promise. But his eyes, dark with longing, said the opposite. He would wait. He would fight. He would burn the Empire down for her if she asked. A beep cut through the silence. They both froze. It was the portable comms unit in Lyra's pocket. It was chirping, a secure frequency. Lyra pulled it out, her hands shaking. It is Kale's frequency. She activated it. Kale? Static hissed. Then a text readout scrolled across the tiny screen. Shuttle destroyed. I am grounded but alive. Intercepted corporate transmission. Lyra read the next line, and her breath caught. Target acquired. Survivor Group Delta. Location Sector 4, Moonbase Theta. Cargo includes human juvenile female. Ida Mia. Elias gasped, looking over her shoulder. The girl, the one I hid under the table. She's alive? She is alive, Lyra said, her voice hardening, and she is being transported by a corporate security vessel. She looked at Elias. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by the steely resolve of the princess who had challenged a council. They have witnesses, she said. They are gathering the loose ends to tie them up permanently. We have to get to them before the corporation does, Elias said. Lyra nodded. She looked at the comms unit, then at the storm outside. We have a new objective, she said. She looked at Elias one last time, the memory of the kiss still burning on her lips. She tucked it away, deep in her heart, and stood up. Let's go get our ship fixed. Omega Station was a festering wound in the side of the galaxy, a sprawling, rusted labyrinth of docking pylons and pressurized habitats drifting in the lawless expanse of the Terminus sector. It was a place where the Empire's laws were distant suggestions and the Federation's morality was a joke told in back-alley bars. The air in the main concourse smelled of recycled ozone, frying oil, and the musk of a dozen different species packed too closely together. Neon signs in jarring, mismatched languages flickered overhead, advertising everything from illicit hyperfuel to hour-long marriages. Princess Lyra pulled the hood of her rough-spun cloak lower over her face. She was no longer the luminous jewel of the ascendancy. She was just another traveler trying not to get mugged. A massive, four-armed dock worker lumbered past, his shoulder slamming into Lyra with enough force to spin her around. She stumbled, catching herself against a grime-streaked bulkhead. Watch where you are going. Runt. The worker grunted, not even looking back as he vanished into the crowd. Lyra stood frozen, blinking in shock. Her instinct, honed by 20 years of royal protocol, was to wait for the apology. In the palace, if a servant brushed against her hem, They would prostrate themselves and beg forgiveness for 3 minutes. She waited. The crowd simply flowed around her like water around a stone. No one cared. No one stopped. Elias Ward leaned against a support pillar, watching her with a grin that tugged at the bruise on his cheek. "You are waiting for him to bow," Elias said, his voice low and amused. "I am waiting for basic civility," Lyra hissed, adjusting her disguise. He nearly dislocated my shoulder. "Welcome to the bottom of the food chain, Highness," Elias teased, pushing off the pillar. "Down here. You are not royalty. You are just mass-occupying space. If you want respect, you have to carry a bigger blaster." Lyra rubbed her arm, looking at the chaotic swirl of life around them. "It is horrible." Elias laughed softly. "It is free. Come on. Kale is waiting." They moved through the crushing throng. Kale had managed to secure a temporary safe house in the lower maintenance levels, a place where the station's sensors were blind. The Praetorian Guard had traded his gleaming platinum armor for a scuffed mercenary's rig, but he still moved with the lethal grace of a predator. They found him standing guard outside a rusted blast door marked hazardous waste storage. He nodded as they approached, keying the lock. Inside, the room was dimly lit by emergency strips. Sitting on crates and sleeping on makeshift pallets were the survivors. There were only 12 of them, 12 people out of 3,000. Lyra's heart clenched. They looked shattered, bandaged, hollow-eyed, still wearing the tattered remains of hospital gowns or flight suits. In the corner, a young human girl with dark, matted hair sat hugging her knees. She looked up as the door opened, her eyes wide and terrified, locked onto Elias. "Dr. Ward?" she whispered. Elias dropped his pack and crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling before her. "Mia?" The girl launched herself at him, burying her face in his chest. Elias held her tight, rocking her back and forth. "I thought you were dead," Mia sobbed, her voice muffled by his jacket. "I saw the bridge go. I am here," Elias murmured, smoothing her hair. "I am right here." Lyra watched from the doorway, feeling like an intruder in this raw human grief. Kyle stepped up beside her. "She has been talking," Kyle said quietly. "The corporate security team that picked them up. They were not careful. They thought the survivors were too drugged to listen." Lyra walked over, kneeling beside Elias and the girl. Mia looked at her with suspicion, shrinking back. "It is okay," Elias said softly. "She is a friend. She is going to help us." Mia looked at Lyra's violet skin and golden eyes. "You are one of them," she whispered. "The ones with the black ships." "I am not with them," Lyra said, her voice trembling slightly. "I am fighting them." "What did you hear?" "Mia." The girl wiped her nose, her voice small and halting. "The men in the gray armor, the ones who pulled our pod, they were laughing. They said the cleanup was sloppy. They said Admiral Sarax would dock their pay if they left any loose ends." Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. "They used his name?" Mia nodded. "They said Sarax and the Vanguard reps were drinking champagne while we burned." The confirmation was a physical blow. It was one thing to see data trails and bank transfers. It was another to hear a child recount the callousness of her executioners. Elias looked at Lyra over the girl's head. His eyes were hard. "We need those records," he said. Kyle checked his datapad. "The Vanguard Systems Regional Office is on the upper promenade. It is a fortress." Lyra stood up, the shock in her chest hardening into a cold, diamond-sharp rage. "Then we break in," she said. The ventilation shafts of Omega Station were not built for royalty. They were cramped, greasy, and smelled of decaying coolant fluid. Lyra pulled herself forward on her elbows, suppressing a cough. Her knees were scraped raw, and her hands were black with grime. Beside her, Elias moved with practiced efficiency, checking the schematics on a stolen datapad. "Left at the junction," he whispered. "That should put us directly over the server room." "We are insane," Lyra muttered, crawling after him. "If my mother could see me now, crawling through a sewer to rob a corporation." "She would probably be impressed by your tactical positioning," Elias whispered back, "or horrified by your hygiene." "Focus, Doctor," Lyra scolded, though a small smile touched her lips. They reached the vent grate. Below them, the Vanguard system server room was a sterile white box, humming with the sound of cooling fans. A single technician sat at a console, bored, scrolling through a news feed. "Kyle." Lyra tapped her comms bead. "Position, perimeter secure." Kale's voice crackled. "I have looped the camera feed in the corridor. You have 5 minutes before the shift change." Lyra removed the grate with magnetic clamps, lowering it silently to the floor. Elias dropped down first, landing in a crouch. He moved behind the technician, applying a sleeper hold. The man slumped forward without a sound. Lyra dropped down next, rushing to the terminal. She plugged in her decoder spike, accessing the main frame, she murmured. Her fingers flew across the holographic interface. The encryption was heavy, corporate-grade ice, but Lyra had been trained by Imperial intelligence tutors since she was 6. She bypassed the firewalls, slipping through the digital back doors. She found the file directory, Project Silent Night. She opened it. The screen is filled with documents, contracts, blueprints, weapon manifests. "Here." Elias pointed to a memo. "Look at the supply requisition." Lyra read it. Item, cloaking field generators. Mark IV, quantity, 6. Destination, Imperial Black Fleet. Purpose, controlled escalation field test. Target, civilian soft target, medical. Lyra felt sick. They called it a field test. The murder of 3,000 people was just a product demonstration. She kept scrolling. There were financial projections. Post-incident analysis, projected profit spikes in Sector 7 repair contracts, 400%. Ammunition resupply demand, critical. And then she saw it, the authorization grant for the initial purchase. It was signed by the Ministry of Defense. But below that, countersigned as a Royal Discretionary Fund allocation, was the seal of the Empress. Lyra froze. The room seemed to spin. "Lyra," Elias said, noticing her stillness. "Grab the drive. We have to go." Lyra stared at the seal. It was her mother's personal sigil. Not a stamp, but a biometric key. "She knew," Lyra whispered. "She didn't just look away. She paid for it." "Lyra, we don't have time," Elias urged. She signed the check. "Elias!" Lyra turned to him, her eyes wide and brimming with horror. "My mother bought the weapons that killed your friends." Elias grabbed her shoulders, shaking her hard. "Listen to me. We can fall apart later. Right now, we have to get this data out, or Mia dies. Do you understand?" The mention of the girl snapped Lyra back to reality. She nodded, jerking the drive from the port. "Let's go," she choked out. They retreated to a secondary safe room Kale had established, a small, abandoned storage unit deep in the station's underbelly. It was quiet, far from the noise of the concourse. Lyra sat on a crate, staring at the data drive in her hand. She had not spoken since they left the vents. She was shaking, a fine, constant tremor that rattled her breath. Elias finished checking the perimeter and walked over to her. He didn't say anything. He just sat down beside her and wrapped his arm around her shoulders. The touch broke the dam. Lyra dropped the drive and buried her face in her hands, a ragged sob tearing from her throat. I am one of them. She wept. I am not different. I live in that palace. I wear the clothes bought with this blood money. Every luxury I have ever known came from this machinery of death. You are not them, Elias said firmly, pulling her closer. My mother signed it, Lyra cried into his shoulder. She warned me to stay away because she knew. She knew she was complicit. Elias held her, one hand stroking the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her silver hair. He let her cry. He let her pour out the shame and the betrayal that had been festering since she left the capital. It is not your sin, Elias whispered against her ear. You are the one trying to stop it. That is the only thing that matters. Lyra lifted her head, looking at him. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes swollen. You should hate me. My family killed your people. Elias looked at her. He saw the grief, the raw vulnerability, the fierce moral compass that had driven her to risk everything for a stranger. I don't see a princess, he said softly. I just see Lyra. The shift in the air was sudden. The grief didn't vanish, but it transformed into a desperate need for connection, for something real and alive to hold on to in the wreckage of their worlds. Lyra leaned in, seeking his warmth. Elias met her, his other hand coming up to cup her jaw. This time, there was no hesitation, no talk of species or protocols. Lyra kissed him fiercely, claiming pressure. Elias responded with equal hunger, pulling her into his lap. The kiss deepened, tasting of salt tears and desperation. They moved together in the dim light of the storage room, shedding the layers of armor and disguise. When skin touched skin, the bioluminescence of Lyra's body flared, not the bright violet of anger, but a soft, pulsing gold that illuminated the scars on Elias's chest. It was a night of hushed whispers and frantic touches. They explored each other with a mix of reverence and urgency, terrified that this might be the only time they would ever have. They clung to one another as if they were the only two solid things in a universe dissolving into chaos. In the dark, Lyra whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep, and Elias confessed fears he had never spoken aloud. It was intimate, raw, and profoundly taboo, a union of enemy bloodlines forging a new loyalty in the dark. The next morning, the station's artificial dawn cycle hummed through the vents. Lyra woke first, curled against Elias's side on the makeshift pallet. She watched him sleep for a moment, tracing the line of his jaw with a finger. She felt different. The crushing weight of her heritage was still there, but she no longer felt alone under it. Elias stirred, opening his eyes. He blinked, focusing on her, and a slow, sleepy smile spread across his face. "Good morning, Your Highness," he mumbled. "Good morning, terrorist," Lyra replied, a playful glint in her eye. They lay there for a moment, the reality of the previous night settling in. A sudden wave of awkwardness hit them both simultaneously. They were fully dressed now, but the memory of the intimacy was vivid. "So," Elias said, clearing his throat and sitting up. "That was..." "Effective diplomatic relations," Lyra supplied, her cheeks flushing a light pink. "Extremely effective," Elias agreed, rubbing the back of his neck. "We should probably write a treaty. Or something." Lyra laughed, a bright sound that seemed out of place in the grime of the room. The door hissed open. Cale stood there, holding 2 cups of steaming sludge-like coffee. He looked at Elias, then at Lyra, and then at the single pallet they had clearly shared. His expression remained completely flat. "I have secured breakfast," Cale rumbled, "and I am going to pretend that the tactical positioning of the sleeping arrangements was purely for thermal conservation." "Cale," Lyra began. Mortified, "Do not explain," Kale interrupted, handing her a cup. "I am a bodyguard, not a chaperone. Though I will note, Dr. Ward, that if you break her heart, I will break your spine in 3 places." "Noted," Elias said, taking his own cup with a nervous smile. "Drink up," Kale said, his tone shifting to business. "We have a problem. I tried to tap into the station's broadcast array to upload the data. The signal is being jammed." "Jammed?" Lyra sat up straight, the softness of the morning vanishing. "By whom?" "Station security," Kale said, "and they are not alone." I picked up chatter on the mercenary band. "A Vanguard retrieval team is sweeping the sector. They know we are here. They moved fast." The plan was simple. Get to the station's main communication relay at the Spire's summit, physically bypass the jammer, broadcast the data to every newsnet in the quadrant, and then run. They sprinted through the corridors of the upper levels. The station was waking up, crowds filling the walkways. "There," Elias pointed. "The relay access is behind those blast doors." As they approached, the crowd suddenly parted. 4 heavily armored figures stepped out, blocking the path. They wore the matte gray plating of Vanguard corporate mercenaries. "Target acquired," the lead merc growled, his voice amplified. "Secure the data. Liquidate the assets. Go!" Kale roared, shoving Lyra and Elias toward a service corridor. Blaster fire erupted. Red bolts sizzled through the air, scorching the bulkheads. The panic in the crowd was instant. People screamed and trampled each other to get away. Lyra drew a stun pistol she had lifted from the safe house. She fired back, the blue energy rings taking a mercenary in the knee. He went down, cursing. Elias grabbed a fire suppression canister from the wall and hurled it into the group. He shot it mid-air. A cloud of thick white chemical foam exploded outward, blinding the attackers. "Move! Move!" Elias yelled. They scrambled down the service corridor, boots ringing on the metal grating. More mercenaries appeared at the far end, flanked by station security droids. "They are hurting us," Kyle realized. "They are cutting off the relay." "We have to get to the docks," Lyra shouted, returning fire. "We can broadcast from the shuttle if we get clear of the jamming field." They took a sharp right, sliding into the industrial freight sector. The air here was thick with steam from the cooling pipes. A heavy repeater blaster opened up from a catwalk above, tearing up the floor around them. "Take cover." Kale tackled Lyra behind a cargo hauler. Elias dove behind a stack of plasteel drums. "We are pinned down." Kale looked at the heavy blast door 10 meters ahead. It led to the cargo lifts. It was their only way to the hangar bay. But the mercenaries were closing in from both sides. "Lyra," Kale said, his voice calm amidst the chaos. "Give me the data drive." "No," Lyra said, clutching it. "We stick together. Give it to Elias," Kale ordered. "He is faster." He grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her up. "On my mark, you run for the door. Do not look back." "Kale, what are you doing?" Lyra asked, panic rising in her chest. "I am clearing the path," Kale said. He stood up, breaking cover. With a roar, he fired his heavy suppression rifle, spraying plasma into the mercenary ranks. The sudden aggression forced them to duck. "Run!" Kale screamed. Lyra and Elias sprinted. The air sizzled with near misses. They threw themselves through the heavy blast door into the cargo lift anteroom. Elias hit the control panel. The door began to slide shut. "Kale." Lyra turned back. Kale was not running. He was standing in the center of the corridor, holding his ground. He had tossed his rifle and drawn 2 combat knives. A squad of 6 mercenaries was charging him. "Kale, get inside!" Lyra screamed, lunging forward. Elias caught her around the waist, holding her back. "He's not coming." "Lyra!" Kale looked back at them through the narrowing gap. His armor was smoking, and blood ran down his face from a graze. He looked at Lyra, and for the first time, He smiled, a sad, proud smile. Make this death cost them everything. Highness, Kale said. He hit the external lock override on the wall panel next to him. No! Lyra shrieked. The blast door slammed shut, sealing with a heavy final thud. A second later, through the thick metal, they heard the muffled sounds of a brutal struggle, a defiant roar, and then silence. Lyra threw herself against the door, pounding on the cold steel. Open it! Elias, open it! Elias pulled her away, his own face wet with tears. It's locked from the outside. Lyra, he sealed it. We have to go. No, Lyra sobbed, her legs giving out. She slid to the floor, gasping for air. He is my friend. He is my family. Elias knelt beside her, grabbing her face with both hands. He is gone. Lyra, he bought us time. If we stay here, he died for nothing. Do you hear me? For nothing. The word slapped her like a physical blow. Lyra stared at Elias, her golden eyes swimming with tears, her chest heaving with the agony of the loss. She forced herself to breathe. She forced the image of Kale's smile into the center of her mind, fueling the fire that was burning her alive. She grabbed Elias's hand and pulled herself up. She was shaking, but she was standing. The lift, she rasped. The escape was a blur of gray corridors and flashing alarms. They reached the hangar bay where they had stashed the survivors and the stolen shuttle. Mia and the others were already on board, huddled in the hold. Lyra and Elias sprinted up the ramp. Get us out of here, Lyra yelled to the survivor who had taken the pilot's seat, an ex-Navy pilot named Jackson. The shuttle's engines roared, the docking clamps released. As they spun toward the atmospheric shield, Lyra saw the mercenary team bursting through the airlock doors onto the flight deck. They opened fire, but it was too late. The shuttle punched through the shield and rocketed into the black. Lyra sat in the co-pilot's chair, staring blankly at the console. Her hands were stained with grease and dirt. On the sleeve of her tunic, there was a smear of dark purple blood, Kale's blood, from when he had tackled her to safety. Elias came up behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder. We are clear of the jamming field. Lyra nodded slowly. She didn't look at him. She looked out the viewport at the stars, cold, distant, and indifferent. Do we broadcast? Elias asked gently. Lyra looked down at her sleeve. In the blood. No, she whispered. Elias frowned. Lyra? If we broadcast now, Lyra said, her voice turning to ice, Serax will spin it. He will say it is a fake. He will bury it in a news cycle. He will claim Kale was a rogue agent. She turned the chair around. Her face was dry now. The tears were gone. In their place was something terrifyingly regal. We are not going to leak this to the press, Lyra said. We are going to take this to the summit. The summit? Elias asked. The peace summit at the Capitol? That is a suicide run. The entire fleet will be there. Exactly, Lyra said. All the cameras in the galaxy will be focused on my mother and Serax. She stood up, walking to the viewport. She stared at the vector that led back to the heart of the Empire. Kale told me to make it cost them everything, she said softly. She touched her hand to the glass, as if reaching for the throat of the Empire itself. We are going home, Elias, and we are going to burn Serax down in front of the entire universe. The capital world of the Ascendancy. Prime, hung in the void like a sphere of polished amethyst wrapped in a net of silver fire. From the cockpit of the stolen freighter, the planet looked less like a home and more like a fortress. The orbital traffic was a dense river of light, diplomatic cruisers, heavy warships, and cargo haulers, all funneling toward the equatorial spaceport. Elias Ward gripped the yoke of the Starling, his knuckles white. He adjusted the transponder frequency, his eyes darting between the shield grid telemetry and the approaching patrol drones. "Hold the drift," Lyra said from the co-pilot's seat. Her voice was tight, lacking its usual melodic cadence. "If we deviate by more than 2 degrees, the automated defense grid will interpret us as a falling projectile and vaporize us." "I am trying," Elias muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. "This tub handles like a brick in a gravity well. And these codes, are you sure they are still good?" "They were valid when Kale pulled them from the network," Lyra said. Her voice cracked on the name, but she forced herself to continue. "The rotation cycle is 72 hours. We have 40 minutes before they expire." The ship shuddered as they hit the upper atmosphere. Outside the viewport, the black of space gave way to the searing orange of re-entry friction. Elias glanced at her. She looked exhausted. The grime from the station was still streaked across her cheek, and her ceremonial robes were torn at the hem. She was a princess returning to her kingdom not in a golden chariot, but in a garbage hauler, hunted by her own fleet. "We can still turn back," Elias said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the atmospheric thrusters. Lyra looked at him sharply. "What?" "We can turn back," Elias repeated, louder this time. "We drop the data packet on a relay buoy and run for the outer rim. We disappear." "And what happens then?" Lyra asked. "The Empress suppresses the data. Serac spins a story about a rogue hack. The war starts anyway." "But you live," Elias argued. "Lyra, look at that grid. Look at the security. If we land, we are walking into a meat grinder. They will kill you before you get within a mile of the dais. I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees in some backwater moon." "Hiding from my own name," Lyra snapped. "It is not about hiding," Elias shouted, the fear for her life breaking through his restraint. "It is about survival. I have lost my crew. I have lost my ship. I lost Kale. I cannot lose you too." The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the screaming wind outside the hull. Lyra reached out, placing her hand over his on the throttle. Her skin was cool, glowing a soft, steady blue. "You will not lose me," she said softly. "But if we do not do this, if we let them get away with murdering 3,000 people for a stock dividend, then we are already dead. We are just ghosts waiting to lie down." Elias looked at her, seeing the iron resolve beneath the exhaustion. He let out a long, ragged breath and nodded. "Okay," he whispered. "We do it." He punched the landing sequence. The Starling banked hard, slipping out of the commercial lane and diving toward the industrial district that ringed the capital city. A sprawling landscape of smog, factories, and shadows. The air in Sector 12 tasted of sulfur and unrefined coolant. It was the engine room of the Empire, the place where the pristine crystal spires of the upper city were supported by miles of grinding machinery and underpaid labor. Lyra pulled her hood low as they stepped off the cargo ramp. She coughed, the harsh air stinging her throat. "Welcome to the royal tour," she muttered dryly. "I do not think the travel brochures mention the smell." They moved quickly through the alleys, avoiding the automated security drones that patrolled the main thoroughfares. They met their contact in the back room of a subterranean noodle shop, a nervous Solarian technician named Vorn, who owed his life to a medical neutrality grant Lyra had sponsored years ago. Vorn's hands shook as he laid the equipment on the greasy table. "This is madness, Highness," Vorn hissed, his large eyes darting to the door. "Serax has the city on total lockdown. There are sniffer drones everywhere." "Did you bring what I asked for?" Lyra asked, ignoring his panic. Vorn nodded. He pushed forward two small metallic discs and a pair of identification badges. Retinal scramblers, he explained. Stick them to your temple. They project a false biosignature for 12 hours. And these badges are coded for Level 4 maintenance access. They will get you into the service tunnels, but not the main halls. Thank you, Vorn, Lyra said. She picked up one of the discs. It looked like a coin, humming with faint energy. She frowned at it, turning it over in her hand. How does it attach? She asked. Is there a localized adhesive field? Vorn blinked. You lick the back and stick it on. Highness, it uses a chemical bond. Lyra stared at him. I beg your pardon? You lick it, Elias said, unable to suppress a snort of laughter despite the tension. Like a stamp. You know what a stamp is, right? Or do your letters just float to their destination on a breeze of royal intent? Lyra glared at him. I am aware of adhesive technology. I was simply expecting something less biological. She tentatively licked the metal disc and pressed it to her temple. It stung, and her skin flashed a brief, irritated violet before the device hummed into sync with her biorhythm. There, Elias said, grinning as he applied his own. Now you look like a very distinguished plumber. Lyra adjusted her rough-spun tunic, trying to look natural. I feel ridiculous. You look like someone who works for a living, Elias said, handing her a heavy tool belt. Put this on, and try to walk with a slouch. You have too much posture. Too much posture? Lyra asked, offended. Yes. You walk like you own the pavement. You need to walk like the pavement owes you money but is not going to pay. Shoulders down, head low. They stepped out into the smog-choked street. Above them, far beyond the layer of industrial haze, the floating city of the Imperial Palace gleamed in the sunlight, awaiting the summit. The infiltration was a vertical marathon. They used the maintenance lifts to ascend from the industrial depths to the service levels of the palace. The air grew cleaner, the walls shifting from rusted steel to polished white marble, though they stayed strictly within the narrow, unadorned corridors used by the staff and droids. Lyra led the way. She moved with surprising confidence through the maze of pipes and conduits. I did not know you spent so much time in the crawl spaces, Elias whispered as they ducked under a massive heat exchanger. Kyle and I used to play hide the crown here when I was a child, Lyra whispered back, her voice echoing slightly in the vent. He would count to 100 and I would squeeze into the smallest spaces I could find. She paused at a junction, her hand resting on the cool metal of the wall. Her eyes dimmed for a moment. He never found me, she said softly. I always had to come out and surrender. Elias placed a hand on her back. He is with us. Lyra. Every step. They reached the sublayer of the grand audience hall. The sound of the summit drifted down through the ventilation grates, a murmur of thousands of voices, the rustle of silk, the clinking of metals. Lyra checked the time on Vorn's data pad. The Empress speaks in 10 minutes. We need to be in the control room. The control room was located in the gallery dome, overlooking the entire hall. It was automated, staffed only by a skeleton crew of monitoring droids. They climbed the final ladder. Elias groaned as his injured leg protested, but he pushed through the pain. Lyra pushed open the hatch, and they pulled themselves up into the darkened control sphere. 3 security droids swiveled toward them. Authorization required, the lead droid intoned. Lyra didn't hesitate. She drew her stun baton and jammed it into the droid's central processor. It sparked and collapsed. Elias tackled the second one, using his weight to knock it off balance before jamming a disruption spike into its neck joint. The third droid raised its weapon arm. Lyra spun, her bioluminescence flaring bright white, and slashed the baton across its sensors. It fired blindly into the ceiling before shutting down. Clear, Elias panted, kicking the debris aside. Lyra rushed to the main console, below them, through the one-way transparasteel floor. The grand audience hall was a breathtaking sea of color. Representatives from 1,000 worlds stood in concentric circles. In the center, on a floating dais of diamond glass, stood the Empress and Grand Admiral Serax. The Empress looked weary. Serax looked triumphant. Lyra plugged the data drive into the broadcast port. Her hands were shaking, but her movements were precise. "I am bypassing the censorship buffer," she said. "I need you to lock the doors. Elias. Once we start this, security will be here in 30 seconds. Elias welded the hatch shut with a laser torch he had grabbed from the tool belt. "We are sealed in." On the dais below, the Empress raised her hands. The hall fell silent. "Citizens of the Ascendancy, allies of the galaxy," the Empress began, her voice amplified to boom like thunder. "We gather today in the shadow of tragedy. The attack on our sovereignty cannot go unanswered. Though our hearts are heavy, our resolve must be iron." Serax stepped forward, nodding solemnly. "Humanity has proven itself incapable of peace," the Empress continued, reading from the teleprompter. "Therefore, I am authorizing a defensive campaign to secure our borders and—" "Now," Lyra whispered. She hit the override key. A chaotic screech of feedback tore through the grand audience hall. The massive holographic banners that hung above the crowd, images of imperial flags and noble crests, flickered and died. A gasp rippled through the assembly. Serax looked up, confused. Then, the screens reactivated. They did not show flags. They showed the interior of the Aegis of Mercy. The footage was grainy, shaky, taken from a helmet cam. It showed the pediatric ward shaking violently. It showed nurses throwing their bodies over children as the hull buckled. It showed the vacuum sucking the life out of the room. The sound was raw, screams, alarms, the terrible groan of dying metal. "Cut the feed," Serax roared, his voice cracking. "Cut it now." But the feed did not cut. It shifted. A document appeared on the screens, massive and undeniable. Vanguard Systems Invoice 99 Alpha. Payment for asset liquidation, H.S.S. Aegis of Mercy. Then came the audio. It was Serax's voice, clear and cold. "The target is a soft asset. Ensure no survivors. We need a clean casualty count to sell the mobilization bill." The crowd in the hall erupted. It was not applause. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. Diplomats shouted. Generals looked at each other in shock. Then came Mia's voice, playing over the image of the burning wreckage. They laughed. They said the Admiral would dock their pay if they left any loose ends. On the dais, the Empress stood frozen. She looked at the screen, seeing her own seal on the document scrolling past. She looked at Serax, who was screaming into his comms unit. "Traitors!" Serax bellowed, pointing at the ceiling. "Terrorists have hacked the system. Shoot them down. In the control room." The door buckled. "They are cutting through." Elias yelled over the noise of the plasma cutter melting the lock. Lyra kept the stream running just a little longer. The survivor testimonies are uploaded. Sparks showered down as the door gave way. A squad of Imperial Guard elites stormed in, blasters raised. "Drop it!" the captain screamed. Elias grabbed Lyra, pulling her behind the console as red plasma bolts chewed up the machinery. "We have to jump," Lyra shouted. She pointed to the transparasteel floor. "It is a 50-foot drop," Elias yelled back, firing blindly over the desk. "Better than a firing squad." Lyra drew her baton and smashed the emergency release on the floor panel. The transparent steel beneath them dissolved into mist. They fell. They hit the central dais with a bone-jarring impact. Lyra rolled, absorbing the shock, her training taking over. Elias landed hard, sprawling onto the diamond glass. He groaned, scrambling to his feet, his weapon raised. The hall went deadly silent. There, in the center of the chaos, stood the princess of the Ascendancy. Her robes were torn, her face was streaked with grease and soot, and her skin was glowing with a fierce, blinding gold light. Beside her stood the human fugitive, battered and defiant. "Lyra!" the Empress gasped, taking a step back. Sarax spun around, his face twisted in a rictus of rage. "You! You lied!" Lyra screamed, her voice projecting without a microphone, carried by the acoustics of the hall. She pointed a trembling finger at her uncle. "You murdered them. You killed 3,000 innocents to boost a stock price." "It is a fabrication," Sarax shouted, looking at the crowd. "She is sick. She has been brainwashed by this human." "The evidence is on the screens," Lyra countered, gesturing to the holograms that were still playing the damning loop of destruction. "You ordered the strike. You paid Vanguard Systems, and you tried to kill the witnesses." The crowd was murmuring now, an angry rising tide. The truth was too detailed, too grotesque to be a lie. Sarax saw his power crumbling. He saw the general stepping away from him. He saw the Empress looking at him with horror. He made a choice. If he could not rule, he would destroy. He drew his sidearm, a heavy gold-plated disruptor pistol, human filth. Sarax snarled, aiming the weapon not at Lyra, but at Elias. Elias froze. He was exposed. There was no cover. "No!" Lyra screamed. She moved faster than I expected. She stepped in front of Elias, throwing her arms out wide. She placed her body directly between the gun and the man she loved. "Shoot me then," Lyra challenged, her golden eyes blazing into Sarax's soul. "If you want to kill the truth, you have to kill me first." The hall held its breath. Thousands of beings watched in stunned silence. The princess, shielding the human. The monster, holding the gun. Sarax's hand wavered. He could kill a human. He could kill 1,000 humans. But to execute the heir to the throne on live broadcast, that was an ending he could not survive. "You are a fool," Sarax spat. He lowered the gun, but his other hand went to his belt. He pressed a panic button. "Protocol 0, he screamed. "Sanitize the room." The floor of the hall shuddered. Hidden panels in the walls slid open. Mechanized security droids, massive, arachnid machines painted in the black and red of the Admiral's personal guard, dropped from the ceiling. They did not target the exits. They targeted the crowd. Chaos erupted. Diplomats screamed and dove for cover as the mechs opened fire with stun cannons and suppression gas. It was a distraction, a brutal, chaotic smokescreen to cover Sarax's escape. "Seize him!" the Empress screamed, her voice cutting through the panic. "Guards! Protect the Council!" The Royal Guard clashed with Sarax's corrupted mechs. Blaster fire filled the air with ozone and flashing light. "He is running!" Elias yelled, pointing. Sarax was sprinting toward the rear exit of the dais, heading for the private turbo lift to the observation spire. Lyra grabbed Elias's hand. "Do not let him leave." They ran. They dodged a crashing chandelier brought down by a stray bolt. They vaulted over the stunned form of a diplomat. They chased the Admiral into the corridors of power. The chase led them up, past the council chambers, past the royal apartments, up to the highest point of the palace, the observation spire. Sarax burst onto the observation deck, a circular room with glass walls offering a panoramic view of the burning city below. He fumbled with the controls for his private shuttle, which was docked on the landing pad outside. Lyra and Elias burst through the doors behind him. It is over. Uncle, Lyra shouted, raising her stun baton. Serac spun around, firing a wild shot that shattered a pane of glass. Wind howled into the room, whipping Lyra's hair across her face. Over? Serac laughed, a manic, breathless sound. You think this is over because you showed some pictures? The war is inevitable. Lyra, the economy demands it. The Empire demands it. People demand peace, Lyra shouted, stepping forward. People are sheep, Serac roared. They need a shepherd with a sword. Those humans on that ship, they were acceptable collateral. They were a down payment on a future where we rule the stars forever. Elias let out a roar of pure primal rage. Acceptable collateral? He charged. He ducked under Serac's next shot, tackling the larger alien. They crashed into the control console. The disruptor pistol skittered across the floor. Elias punched Serac in the face. He hit him again and again. All the grief, all the terror, all the nights waking up screaming about the vacuum, it all poured into his fists. Acceptable? Elias screamed, slamming Serac's head against the metal floor. Were my friends acceptable? Mia acceptable? Serac was bloodied, dazed, unable to defend himself against the ferocity of the human's attack. Elias reached for a shard of broken glass lying on the floor. He raised it, his eyes wild, ready to drive it into Serac's throat. Elias! Lyra screamed. No! She grabbed his arm. Her grip was strong, desperate. Do not do it! He deserves it! Elias yelled, his voice breaking. He is a monster! Yes! Lyra cried, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. He is. But you are not. She looked into his eyes, pleading. If you kill him now, in anger, you become just another soldier in his war. We fought for justice. Elias, not vengeance. Do not let him take that from you too. Elias froze. He looked at the jagged glass in his hand. He looked at the ruin of Serac's face beneath him. He looked at Lyra, who was looking at him with a love so fierce it hurt to breathe. He let out a shuddering breath. His hand opened. The glass clattered to the floor. He stood up, backing away, his chest heaving. Serac groaned, trying to crawl toward the door. You are weak, Serac wheezed, spitting purple blood. You do not have the stomach to finish it. I do not need to, Lyra said coldly. The turbo-lift doors hissed open. The Empress stepped out. She was flanked by a dozen royal guards, their weapons leveled at Serac. The room went silent, save for the howling wind. The Empress walked past Lyra and Elias. She stopped over Serac, looking down at him with eyes that were no longer afraid, only infinitely weary. She reached down and ripped the rank insignias from his shoulders. The fabric tore with a sharp sound. Grand Admiral Serac, she said, her voice flat and final. You are stripped of rank, title, and name. You are under arrest for high treason and crimes against sapient life. Take him, she ordered. The guards hauled Serac up. He did not fight. He looked at the Empress, then at Lyra, and finally slumped. A broken man dragged away to the darkness he had tried to unleash. The Empress stood alone for a moment, looking out at the smoke rising from the city. Then she turned. She looked at Lyra. She looked at the torn robes, the dirt, the defiant human standing at her shoulder. She saw the bruises, the exhaustion, and the undeniable strength. Lyra braced herself for a reprimand, for a lecture on protocol. Instead, the Empress closed her eyes and let out a long sigh. You destroyed my summit, the Empress said softly. You humiliated the throne. You broke 1,000 laws. I did what was necessary, Lyra said, lifting her chin. The Empress opened her eyes. A strange expression crossed her face. Grief, yes, but beneath it, a profound, painful pride. Yes, the Empress whispered. You did. She looked at Elias, nodding once, a gesture of respect that was more valuable than any medal. "The galaxy has changed, my daughter," the Empress said, looking back to the stars. "I only hope we are strong enough to survive it." Lyra reached out and took Elias's hand, his fingers interlaced with hers, squeezing tight. "We are," Lyra said, and as the sun began to set over the capital, bathing the room in fire and gold, they stood together, the princess and the human, ready to build something new from the ashes. The aftermath of the summit was not a silence, but a roar. It was the sound of a galaxy exhaling a breath it had held for decades. The footage of the Aegis of Mercy played on loop in the public squares of Prime, on the hollow screens of trade stations, and in the private quarters of starships across the sector. The image of the child's drawing floating in the vacuum became a symbol that transcended species and language. Protests erupted, not violent, but massive and undeniable. Citizens of the Ascendancy marched with blue armbands, the color of human medical scrubs, demanding accountability from a government that had traded honor for profit. The Empress, shrewd enough to survive the storm and wise enough to see the necessity of it, acted swiftly. She announced the formation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a joint body of imperial and human delegates tasked with dismantling the war profiteering networks. To lead it, she appointed the only person with the moral authority to do so, Princess Lyra. It was a poisoned chalice. Lyra knew this as she accepted the datapad containing her commission orders. She was being given the power to clean house, but she was also being positioned as the lightning rod for every entrenched interest she was about to threaten. "I am not just a chairwoman," Lyra told her reflection in the mirror as she adjusted her sash. "I am a target." But she did not flinch. She had seen the void claim the innocent. A few political daggers were nothing by comparison. Elias Ward sat in the guest quarters of the palace, which were significantly more comfortable than his previous cell. The charges against him had been dropped with prejudice. The Federation had sent a diplomatic cruiser to retrieve him. He was a free man. He was a hero. His bag was packed. It sat by the door, a small, nondescript duffel that contained everything he owned in this world. He should go. He knew he should go. His family back on Earth, a sister in Chicago, a cousin on Mars, thought he was dead. He needed to tell them he was alive. He needed to eat a burger. He needed to sleep in a room where the gravity was exactly 1 g. But every time he looked at the door, he felt a physical ache in his chest, as if an invisible tether was pulling him back toward the royal wing. A soft chime at the door made him jump. "Come in," he called. Lyra entered. She was not wearing her ceremonial robes. She wore a simple tunic of silver silk and trousers, her hair tied back loosely. She looked tired, but her skin had a soft, steady glow that warmed the room. "I heard your transport leaves in an hour," she said, standing by the window. Elias nodded, not trusting his voice. "Yeah. The USS Horizon. It is a fast ship. I will be back in human space in 3 days." Lyra looked out at the gardens. The twilight was settling over the city, painting the sky in bands of violet and gold. "You deserve to go home, Elias," she said quietly. "You have done enough. You saved me. You saved the truth. No one would blame you for walking away." Elias walked over to stand beside her. He looked at her profile, the elegant curve of her nose, the bioluminescent markings on her neck that pulsed with her heartbeat. "Is that what you want?" he asked. "Do you want me to go?" Lyra turned to him. Her golden eyes were swimming with unshed tears. "I want you to be safe," she whispered. "If you stay, it will not be easy." The nobles hate you. The military hates you. You will be the human pet of the traitor princess. They will never let you forget that you are an outsider. I have been called worse, Elias said with a faint smile. He reached out, taking her hand. Her fingers were cold, but they warmed instantly against his skin. I am terrified. Lyra, he confessed, his voice dropping. I am scared that if I stay, I will mess this up. I am scared that I am not strong enough for politics. But he squeezed her hand. I am more scared of leaving you here alone. You are taking on the entire establishment. If I go, who is going to watch your back? Who is going to tell you when you are being too royal? Lyra laughed, a wet, choked sound. I have advisors for that. Do they know how to pick a lock with a sonic toothbrush? Elias asked, grinning crookedly. No, Lyra admitted. They lack your specific skill set. They stood in silence for a long moment. The air between them was thick with the memory of the hangar bay, the cold moon, the stolen moments in the dark. There is a clause, Lyra said suddenly, looking at their joined hands. In the Treaty of Centauri, paragraph 412, subsection B. You memorize the treaty? Elias teased. I had a very boring childhood, Lyra retorted. It states that a member of the royal house may appoint a non-citizen as a personal liaison for matters of cultural exchange. It grants diplomatic immunity and residency. Elias raised an eyebrow. A personal liaison? Is that the official term for boyfriend? It is the official term for essential partner in galactic stability, Lyra corrected, a blush rising on her cheeks. But yes, it would give you a reason to stay. Legally. Elias looked at her. He saw the hope she was trying to hide, the vulnerability of a woman who had learned to be strong for everyone else but needed someone to be strong for her. He let go of her hand and walked to the door. Lyra's breath hitched. She thought he was leaving. Elias picked up his bag. He walked back to the window and dropped it on the floor with a heavy thud. I am going to need a bigger office, he said, and better coffee. The stuff in the mess hall tastes like engine coolant. Lyra stared at him, her mouth slightly open. Are you staying? Try and make me leave, Elias said softly. Lyra didn't say anything. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. Elias held her tight, lifting her slightly off the ground. I am staying, he whispered into her hair. I am right here. The appointment of Dr. Elias Ward as the royal liaison to the Truth Commission was met with exactly the level of outrage Lyra had predicted. The conservative press called it a scandal. The tabloids called it a sordid affair. The old guard of the nobility refused to acknowledge Elias's presence at state dinners, looking through him as if he were made of glass. They handled it with a united front. When a duke made a snide comment about human hygiene within earshot, Elias smiled and loudly asked Lyra if the duke was the one who had invested heavily in the now-defunct arms manufacturer. The duke turned purple and scuttled away. When hate mail arrived, and it did in droves, Lyra burned it in the garden, her face set in a mask of calm defiance. Behind closed doors, however, the masks came off. Their relationship became a sanctuary. In the evenings, after hours of grueling testimony and bureaucratic fighting, they would retreat to Lyra's private chambers. They found a rhythm. Elias would cook terrible, spicy approximations of Earth food using alien ingredients, and Lyra would complain about the heat while eating every bite. He introduced her to the concept of sweatpants, which she initially found undignified and then refused to take off for an entire weekend. But it was in the quiet, intimate moments that they truly healed. One night, Lyra traced the long, jagged scar on Elias's leg, the legacy of the escape from the archives. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly. "Only when it rains," Elias said, watching her hand moving over his skin. He reached out and touched the bioluminescent markings on her ribs. "And you? Does it hurt to carry all of this? The anger of your own people?" Lyra closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. Her skin glowed a soft, contented blue. "Not when I am with you," she whispered. Their lovemaking was not just physical. It was a reclamation, in a galaxy that demanded they be symbols, the princess and the witness, the alien and the human, in bed. They were just Lyra and Elias. They explored each other with a reverence that bordered on worship, finding safety in the shared vulnerability of naked skin and whispered names. There were cultural hurdles, of course. "Elias," Lyra said one morning, holding up a small, vibrating device she had found in his shaving kit. "What is this? Is it a weapon?" "It is an electric razor," Elias said, snatching it back. "And please do not activate it near the cat." "You do not have a cat," Lyra pointed out. "I might get one," Elias muttered, "just to keep you on your toes." The work of the commission was grueling. Lyra insisted on traveling to the systems most affected by the war profiteering. She met with the families of the Aegis victims. She sat in humble living rooms on Mars and in community centers on the outer rim, listening to stories of lost sons and daughters. She did not offer empty platitudes. She offered concrete justice. "We are seizing the assets of Vanguard systems," she told a weeping mother on Titan. "Every credit they made from the death of your son will go into a fund for medical scholarships. We are building a new fleet of hospital ships, and they will be protected by Imperial destroyers. I promise you." Her speech to the Galactic Senate became a turning point. She stood before thousands of delegates, Elias visible in the gallery above, watching her with pride. "Medical neutrality is not a suggestion," Lyra declared, her voice ringing with the authority she had earned in blood. "It is the line between civilization and savagery. When we bomb a hospital, we do not just kill people, we kill our own future. We kill the idea that we are worth saving." She paused, looking directly at the camera. "The Empire was wrong. I was wrong to be silent for so long, but silence ends today. Justice is not a gift given by the powerful. It is a right demanded by the living, and we will not stop until the debt is paid." The applause was not polite. It was thunderous. It was the sound of a new era beginning. The trial of ex-Grand Admiral Serax was the final act of the old drama. It was broadcast live to every world in the known galaxy. Serax sat in the defendant's box, stripped of his uniform, looking small and old. He did not shout. He did not rant. He simply stared ahead. A man who still could not understand why his grand vision had been rejected. Lyra and Elias testified together. They sat side by side, their shoulders brushing. When Elias's voice wavered as he described the moment the air left the pediatric ward, Lyra reached under the table and took his hand. He squeezed it, took a breath, and continued. The verdict was never in doubt. Serax was found guilty on 3,000 counts of murder, high treason, and conspiracy to incite war. The death penalty was on the table. The mob wanted blood, but Lyra intervened. "We do not kill him." She argued to the Empress in private. "If we kill him, he becomes a martyr to the fanatics. We make him irrelevant." Serax was sentenced to life in exile in a penal colony on the edge of the void, a rock with no atmosphere, no audience, and no power. He would live out his days staring at the stars he tried to conquer, forgotten by the galaxy he tried to break. The dissolution of Vanguard systems followed. Its factories were retooled. Instead of missile guidance systems, they began producing surgical robots. Instead of hull plating for dreadnoughts, they built isolation wards for mobile clinics. Lyra oversaw every contract. She was relentless, she was terrifying, and she was effective. 6 months after the attack, a new ship launched from the orbital yards of Prime. It was a hospital ship, gleaming white, larger and more advanced than the Aegis had ever been. On its hull, painted in gold and blue, was the name, the Spirit of Mercy. It was crewed by humans and aliens working side by side. Lyra and Elias stood on the observation deck as the ship traveled to the coordinates of the tragedy. The quiet sector near the Veil Nebula. The wreckage was gone, cleared away. The stars were silent. The ship held a memorial service. The observation deck was crowded with survivors, dignitaries, and crew. Mia stood at the front. She looked healthier now, her hair shiny, wearing the cadet uniform of the medical academy. She walked to the transparasteel window and pressed a single white synthetic flower against the glass. It adhered there, a tiny speck of brightness against the infinite dark. Elias watched her, his throat tight. "She is going to be a great doctor," he whispered. "She learned from the best," Lyra whispered back. The ceremony ended, and the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving Lyra and Elias alone by the window. The nebula swirled outside, purple and indifference. It was the same view Lyra had seen on the newsfeed that terrible morning. But now, it doesn't look like a graveyard. It looked like a blank canvas. "I used to think peace was a lack of fighting," Lyra said softly, staring at the flower Mia had left. "But it isn't. Peace is work. It is waking up every day and choosing not to look away." Elias turned to her. He reached out and tucked a strand of silver hair behind her pointed ear. "And it is easier when you do not have to do it alone," he said. Lyra looked up at him. Her golden eyes were clear, free of the shadows that had haunted them for so long. "Are you happy, Elias?" she asked. "Here, with the aliens and the terrible coffee?" Elias smiled. He looked at the woman who had risked her crown, her life, and her world for him. He looked at the ship around them, a vessel of healing built from the wreckage of hate. "I have the coffee under control," he said. "I found a smuggler who brings in real Arabica beans." Lyra laughed, bumping his shoulder with hers. "You are incorrigible. I am serious," Elias said, his expression softening. "But to answer your question, yes, I am happy." He pulled her into his arms. They stood there, silhouetted against the starlight. "You know," Lyra murmured against his chest. "My mother asked me yesterday when we are going to make it official." "Official?" Elias asked. "A bonding ceremony," Lyra said casually. "It involves 7 days of fasting, a ritual dance with swords, and you have to recite the lineage of the ascendancy back to the 4th dynasty." Elias paled. "Swords?" "I can handle the swords," Lyra promised, looking up at him with a mischievous glint. "You just have to handle the relatives." "I fought a mech for you," Elias said, kissing her forehead. "I can handle a few ants." They stood together, watching the Spirit of Mercy jump to hyperspace, streaking away to answer a distress call in a distant sector. The war was over. The work had just begun. But as they looked at the future stretching out before them, infinite and bright, they knew one thing for certain. They were ready.